Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Camille ran like a madwoman through the park, realizing that she was catastrophically late for work. And it had to happen that very night the batteries in her watch stopped and the alarm clock didn't wake her up on time. Why should she be surprised? She had been living in total poverty for a long time, unable to afford proper food. And she'd forgotten about clothes when she bought herself normal clothes. Not from, oh shit. And the weather, as luck would have it, it was raining. God forbid my feet get wet and my leather shoes fall apart. And as it happens, she couldn't sleep last night. What can I say? She hasn't eaten properly in a long time. And last night finished with a glass of kefir and the last couple of bagels for the evening for what you say her waist is thin. Camille tried to cheer herself up, but it just didn't seem to work. And what good could it do? If you're on potatoes, cabbage, lettuce. But thank God, at work in a boarding house for the elderly, she could eat more or less normal food. What normal food? What do they feed our old people? Water. A couple of cereals or vermicelli or a handful. Thanks for that. I did have a snack. Camille went to bed with a meager supper last night, but sleep wouldn't come on an almost empty stomach. At work she had a breakfast of porridge, but she missed lunch because of an old lady. And the coworkers were friends. They took everything to the pigsty and left her nothing. Come on, they could have at least left a bowl of soup. Camille slammed the dining room door in indignation, glaring angrily at her coworkers. Camille, I'm sorry, the handout told her. I thought you'd eaten, but I didn't see you here, did you? But the girl didn't want to hear anything. What's the point? She was still hungry. True, the handout gave her a small bag. There's some kefir, some cookies. At least it's more of a relief from hunger. And still no paycheck. And the money hasn't been paid yet. As it happens, everyone probably got their paychecks. But I got nothing, as usual. What money is there? Cat's tears. At least I'm thankful I have a subsidy. Camille was orphaned at 14 when her mother and father died in a factory. What can I say? In their country, few people cared about worker safety. It was a similar situation here. It happened everywhere, especially if the boss grew up in the USSR. And there, the term labor safety for them is just an inscription in the report. My mother and father worked on a collective farm for grain storage, and one day they were just swamped. 10 tons of wheat crushed by the grain. Not just her parents. There were more victims, but only one Camille, out of all those living in the labor village, remained around orphan. No, she was taken in by a distant relative, one of her father's cousins. But what kind of life was that? Survival. The woman didn't want to clothe and feed her, saying that you were better than others. No, she had some leftover clothes from the table after her in-laws, but was there any money in the house? What was the apartment in the center of the city, which the woman rented out and the proceeds simply put in her pocket? But Camille held on as best she could. She realized that just a little bit more, and it will be possible to get a passport, and they're all ready. And sell the apartment. I'll give you a room here. The woman insisted more and more. Don't sell it. What will I do? And where will I go when I get my passport? You'll throw me out on the street under the fence first. But she simply didn't say it out loud, and only shook her head stubbornly. For this, the old woman repeatedly beat her with a stick or a wet towel. I don't know what to say. It was not uncommon to hit a teenager with a poker. Nothing. Let me just get out of here. Wiping her tears, the girl said to herself under her breath. I wish with every fiber of my being that you'd grow up and move to the city. What can I say? Big city means big opportunities. She was wrong. To have all those opportunities, you had to have at least good friends in the right circles. Camille didn't have any. And where would they come from if you grew up in a labor camp on handouts from your aunt, and your parents could not give a proper education? When the girl stammered about going to university, she thought that the world had come to an end. Old Emily yelled so much that almost half of the village went to the street. Ever since then, Camille has realized one thing. She could only count on herself, no one else. But this did not kill her desire to help others. Now, rushing to work and staggering in the wind in a half-starved faint, she glanced at the old man sitting on the bench. It was a man she had noticed, and here a few days ago, the old man was sitting on a bench, leaning on a stick and staring at nothing. At first she thought it was just another dog person, but no, it wasn't. She knew them all by sight, as she always went to work through the park, where residents from neighboring houses walked their pets. This one did, and there wasn't a dog in sight. Strange, she thought, and went on her way. Why should she care about another poor old man? Maybe he can't sleep with these feelings of money. That's why he gets up at 5 o'clock and walks around the room, or goes for a walk in the park. That's the best case scenario. I mean, the kids could easily kick the annoying parent out of the house. And now he's got nowhere to go. Come on, there's always somewhere else to go. The police, for example, there's always a solution for such a stubborn child. She believed in the police. She remembered the deaths of her parents, how the investigator tried to establish the truth. But the truth is always hidden in the place where the big money begins. That grain was unaccounted for. And so the death of the parents was simply written off on their own carelessness, but not on the industrial trauma. The investigator then spread his hands, trying to explain the situation to Camille. What is there to explain? The girl herself saw how the chairman and the owner of the storehouse lived, and he was not favorable to the death of her parents. But money decides everything. Old people, whatever they were, bored, no matter how much they taught. But they were parents. The girl's heart clenched involuntarily in her chest, and she stopped for a moment at the underpass. Memories of her family and parents always brought tears to her eyes. But this minute she saw with her own eyes how helpless old people could be. She involuntarily took a few deep breaths and was about to walk away when a young boy stopped beside her. A young guy stopped. "Girl, are you feeling ill? Maybe you need help. Maybe call an ambulance. Or something else. So you tell me." The voice was very young. It sounded like a child. But when Camille turned her head toward the speaker, she was struck by the difference in appearance and voice. He was a handsome young man, the kind of man they say has a slim shoulders. He stood and looked at her intently. Yes, such not often fit her expensive coat jeans, probably some foreign firm. Black lacquered shoes that shone like something. "Did you come by car?" "What a weather." Not a drop of dirt on his soft shoes. "No, I'm fine. Thanks. I'm not fine. You're all beat up, and your breathlessness is not good. That, take my word for it. My grandfather used to have these attacks. It's people like you who kick old people out of their warm homes, often starve them or make them go begging. Like their Sophia begging in the street, or like that old man on the bench this morning for who knows what kind of need he's sitting on," she thought. "Yes, I know. But never mind. You're not going to care about me with those shoes." The girl took another deep breath and shook her knees, proudly raising her head higher. She walked on. No need to give her superiors a reason to reprimand her for being late. She had already paid for her carelessness once. It won't happen again. Camille once stopped and helped an old lady cross the street. "But I'll be late again. I'll just fire you, that's all. There's always someone else to take your place, and right now I'm just gonna take away your bonus. Do you understand me?" Camille. I was only 10 minutes late, but half of her monthly salary went into the superintendent's pocket. What did she go through? No one knew. And who could she complain to? It was summer, and it was possible to survive well on apples that grew on the territory of the kindergarten. And there were sweet grapes growing there. But it would have been winter. Then this incident taught her a lot, and certainly to the fact that it is better not to lend a helping hand than to be so shamefully humiliated and destitute in everything. No, not an old man, not a child. Can't stop me. And she ran hard to work, as she probably wouldn't run to a fire. And this day, she would not lie on the couch hungry, choking on her tears and thinking how fate had deprived her of everything. The day flew by in a hectic pace, just like every day before that ducks and 24 hours of walking with old people and feeding them from a spoon. But for some reason, Camille could not get that old man on the bench in the park near her house out of her mind. She did not understand what was the reason for such a selectivity of her memory. An ordinary old man, of whom there are many in the country, who often sit like that in the park or in palaces and think about their own things. No, there was something about him that attracted attention. Not a sadness, not an event in his eyes, a thought of the eternal, or maybe regret for the mundane. Okay, if anything, I'll leave the house early next time and ask him how he's doing. Maybe he does need help, 'cause I've become so callous and cruel. Like our superintendent has become a snake, a particularly poisonous snake. Camille smiled and helped a nice old lady outside. She had been friends with Evelyn for a long time. But friendship how? Camille looked after her, helped her shower, change her clothes, go for walks, and the old French teacher gave her life and language lessons. Camille, you're a little sad today. Did something happen in your life? Yes? How can I put it? Evelyn, it's nothing. But you know, I noticed an old man in the park near my house on a bench, but he wasn't homeless. He's dressed clean. Inexpensive, but neat. But you know, he sits, puts his head on a shelf and stares at nothing. What's so remarkable about that? We old people can often sit like that and stare at nothing. And there's nothing we can do about it. No, I understand that. I mean, you know, the look in his eyes. I honestly can't describe it. I thought I'd go over and ask him what happened to him. Maybe I could help. It would be the right thing to do. Maybe his kids kicked him out of the house and the old man's in the streets. Or maybe he can't remember where he lives or he lost his wife. Is that how I lost my husband? It seems like you realize with your head that he's gone. But sometimes I feel so sad that I can't. Evelyn, how about breakfast today? Camille changed the subject so as not to upset the kind old lady. Evelyn hadn't been with them long. Only 6 months ago. All because of her wayward son. He owed the bank money and couldn't pay it back in time. So the bank took the apartment. And the sweet old lady went into a nursing home. What happened to Evelyn's son? You never said. But Camille realized that the money he had received must not have done him any good, since his mother was silent about his fate. You know, Camille, it was relatively tasty. Why should I complain? I realize it's not home-cooked food. And I'm not healthy enough to cook it myself. And there's nothing to cook with. You know that when the bank took my apartment, I even rode around in basements and attics, eating whatever I could get my hands on. I even stood in the street with my hand out, begging for alms in French. Imagine that picture. It's a lot to see and hear in this life, especially when you talk to old people like that every day. Every one of them came here through no fault of their own. Some of them just drank their way out of the apartment, like their new tenant, an associate professor. Others have fallen into the clutches of crooks, like Evelyn's roommate, Nancy. Not such an old woman. What can I say? Everyone's brought here by chance, not by choice. Not Evelyn. I'm sorry. How's your son? Camille. You know, I don't know where he is or what's wrong with him. And to tell you the truth, I don't want to know. And you don't have to ask me. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I just must have done something stupid. It's all right, my girl. It's all right. It's true. You're not the only one who asks me that question. So I just got used to it. From that moment on, Camille never asked her charges personal questions. The shift passed quietly, and the girl was glad that at least this shift passed without adventures. She was walking home through the park, and she went through the park on purpose, through the bench where she had noticed that strange old man. But what she saw shocked her. No, he was sitting on the bench as before, but this minute tears were dripping from his eyes, bitter senile tears that quietly rolled down his wrinkles and cheeks and dripped onto his typist and hands. Camille could not stand it, and taking an old knapsack off his shoulder, approached him. "Good morning. Is something wrong? I can help you." The old man turned his head at the young voice and looked at the girl with unseeing eyes. Camille quietly oohed and nodded and covered her mouth with her hand, so as not to further frighten either the people around or the old man himself. The man's eyes were covered like a shroud. Blindness could be total. Camille thought and sat down on the bench next to him. She did not know how to behave. After all, the old man was nobody to her. And for whatever reason, he was crying. Maybe it was just a rush of feelings, or maybe there's another reason, and he doesn't want to share it with her. "Excuse me, dear girl, I can hear that you're young. You don't have to pay attention to an old man. My eyes are not so blind. I can see your outline, but they're not sharp enough for me to see your pretty face. And I'm sure it is." And Camille smiled involuntarily. She was so pleased to hear those words. It was like a balm to her soul, even if it was said by an old man rather than a young man. She looked at him attentively, and without thinking, she took his hand and stroked it, not thinking how people passing by would look at it. "I can help you with something. You know, I work in a home for the elderly. I can help you if you need it." "Thank you, sweet girl. What's your name?" "Camille. Like Camille in Lewis Carroll's Wonderland." "Mine's Stephen. Just Stephen, if you like, so no offense." "Lovely creature. But your parents certainly had a certain sense of humor. At least they loved the tale. I don't think my parents even read it just in the years I was born. Fashionable was the given name. And I read the book, and really liked the heroine. I don't want to go into the world of the Cheshire Cat and the Wild Hatter." A smile flashed across the old man's face, and it did not escape the eyes of Camille, who was always sensitive to the moods of old men. "His change of mood is one thing that makes me glad that I have distracted you from sad thoughts, and here you are smiling again. You know, I've noticed you for a long time. I often walk to work through the park, and I've always had no time to come over and ask you how you're doing. And then I see you crying. So am I." And you felt sorry for the old man. The girl shook her lips and realized she'd said something stupid. She shouldn't have said that, but just thought for a minute how her words would be perceived by other people, especially those to whom they were addressed. "I apologize if my words offended you." Life had taught Camille to never look at how a person was dressed, and everything in her life had been changed by one incident, probably 3 years ago, when she'd just gotten a job at a nursing home. An old man had come in. How did he get in? He was brought in by ambulance from the local hospital. He was dressed in a hospital suit, pajamas. He didn't have much on him. One bag of personal endeavors, all unshaven and overgrown. Camille was just starting to work then, and on many things, or rather, on many of the inhabitants of the boarding house. She looked with a certain only and squeamishness, but the nurse Sophia had opened her eyes to many things. "Don't look so squeamish, girl. Even an ordinary homeless man can hide under the guise of a general. They bring in this old man, and he's not an old man at all, but a millionaire. What's he doing here?" It goes on. "You're not Belly or the Canaries, but Camille. You were a fool, and you'll always be a fool. How did I get my apartment from the general? No less. Indeed, the very story that happened to Smith was like a kind of Cinderella fairy tale. But the fairy tale heroine was a simple nurse. They just brought in a man suffering from memory loss, and he seems like a nice guy. He's got his papers on him, and he's not dressed like a bum, and it looks like you're holin'. But he doesn't remember anything. Where is he from, and who is he? Why is he here? Turns out he was just drunk. The man, being a guest at a friend's house, fell and hit his head. The friend thought he had already given his soul to God, but he hadn't. It was just a simple blackout. And then what happened? Camille asked as Smith told her story. Then what happened? Nothing. A friend drove him to another town and dumped him. He woke up and didn't remember a thing. But the brave policeman sent him back to us, and he was already old. And the brain is a tricky thing. His memory came back to him, and it turned out that he was not just an old man, but a police general. Oh, come on. Wasn't anyone looking for him? He probably has a wife and kids, and no one filed a report. But it's not that there was no one. He still has a wife and kids, but apparently no one thought to look for him in another area. And here he is. And when I remembered everything, you gave me an apartment. For thinking about him and spoon-feeding him, I gave him shots and compressors. When he had a headache, poor guy. That's it. So don't look at people with a glance. Now she pressed her lips together and apologized to the old man again. Oh, don't be in pain, young lady. I realize that a crying old man is like a crying baby. You want to hug him, stroke his head, like you're putting my hand on him involuntarily. You want to comfort him. It's right. It's human. I'll even say more God's orthodoxy. The historian looked carefully at the girl. He felt the warmth of her hands, saw the outlines of her face, but could not see her features. His eyesight was no longer good, but inwardly he realized that Camille was pure of heart. Although life had used her mercilessly, but the old man himself could not say the same about himself and his life. I guess the time has come when one draws the line and says this was in my life, and this I missed through my own fault. Then can I buy you ice cream? You know, it's been so long since I've sat in a park and had ice cream. Camille didn't know how she said that, but she really did have a craving for ice cream. Just sitting on a bench, eating a sweet treat, talking to a stranger about nothing. Do you really want that? My young ladies, the old man's face brightened up, and an inner light began to shine through the shroud of blindness in his eyes. Well, I'll be honest, it's not a hot summer outside, but I think you and I both deserve this sweet treat. You do? Yeah, I can't believe, Camille, I'm craving chocolate ice cream on a stick. There was a note of happiness and joy in the old man's voice, and Camille promptly jumped up and ran to the ice cream parlor, which stood not far from the park entrance. She opened her wallet and pulled out the last bill from there. Yeah, careless. Yes, Camille. Spending the last of your money on ice cream. Fuck that. This is the last time we live, and I don't have much joy in my life. Maybe it really is that old guy. She handed a bill to the clerk and said 2 ice creams. Please, 1 white, 1 chocolate. Here you go. Have a good appetite. Camille took the 2 ice creams and returned to the bench. She held out the chocolate ice cream to the old man, placing it carefully in his hand. Thank you, my dear. How much do I owe you? Nothing. You keep me company, and I give you ice cream. Then let me make you an offer in return. Next time you're free, we'll meet here in the park, and I'll buy you a scoop of ice cream and coffee. Trust me, it's quite tasty. I know, I tried it once. It's really good. Okay, I'll take it. She did try it once in a cafe, but it was so long ago, probably in her past life, when Alex asked her out and gave her Camille. True, that relationship had not progressed any further. Having found out that she was an orphan, that she worked for pennies in a boarding house for the elderly, he simply left her. I mean, what can a promising student have? And she's just a nurse. Alex, why did you leave me? One day, she met him in town and asked him about it. Why would I want such a penniless orderly? Alex stood there all cocky, fashionably dressed with a cigarette in his hand, and looked up at her. There's really no reason to. Camille walked and berated herself for asking Alex about it. But why? You knew perfectly well the answer to the question. And did you want to hear it? No, especially not in front of witnesses. That was the most frustrating part. After all, when Alex answered, there were several guys and girls standing next to her, and all were witnesses of her shame. Since then, a girl for publicity to put a question to which she knew the answer perfectly well. But now was not the situation, and she could not ignore the old man's offer. Then, my dear Camille of Wonderland, tell me, if you would be so kind, when is your day off? Tonight I'm off after a 24-hour nap, and then I have to work tomorrow. Then we'll have Thursday off. We can treat ourselves on Thursday. Thank you, Camille. See you Thursday then. When can I expect you at this very spot?" And the old man tapped the ground with his stick. "I'll be on my way home from work, so I can keep you company without going home. It will be convenient for you at 10 o'clock. It's always convenient for us old folks, especially if that's what the lovely young lady wants. Until Thursday then, 10 o'clock. And standing up, he theatrically raised his hat and bowed his head and walked quietly down the alley. I nod my wand at 100, so he's not so blind he can see the road. And Camille exhaled. What's the last of the money spent? The ice cream is eaten, and now all that's left is to live to see the paycheck. And it's good that the paycheck is in 3 days. And at home there's still cereal and tea and butter, so we can live. It's all right. Camille had come out of such hungry days. She smiled to herself and went home. At home, she still had to prepare a simple lunch and dinner, dividing a cup of grits and a little butter for 2 meals. But the figure like a model, no extra pounds. Camille ate and turned on the TV. It was the only thing of value in her apartment. A Sony TV that she had bought from a neighbor for a small sum of money. The girl often sat in the evenings and watched news and soap opera while talking to it. Who else could she talk to? She couldn't even get a cat, because it had to be fed. And even herself often didn't have enough money for proper food. Cabbage, sometimes beets and potatoes, and with her paycheck she could buy herself a stick of sausage. A woman took pity on her and sometimes invited her to her dacha for kebabs, and Camille helped her dig the garden and plant potatoes. No, she did not complain about the old nurse. She helped her with food from her garden. She took pity and gave her really good advice. Even twice she covered for her superiors. And you can feed her with bread and water. Do not tell him that sorry, Barsik or Merzik. There's no money. Go catch mice. So we had to talk to the TV. But this old man Camille didn't even ask who he was or what his name was. Oh, come on. Thursday's coming up. We'll have something to talk about later. In the meantime, we should get some sleep. I have to go back to work tomorrow. Like it or not, she was forced to work 24/7 by necessity. I don't know what to say. She's got to make a living. Soon, we'll have to buy new shoes, but there's no money. But all the old ladies in the boarding house say I'm the best soul. So it's not for nothing that I eat my bread and breathe this air. Camille, and indeed, all the old people in the boarding house simply adored, which caused a lot of dissatisfaction with the management. But the girl simply did not understand why she was scolded for this. After all, on the contrary, the superior should praise. Everyone is satisfied. No conflicts. What is there to say? She could calm down even the most conflicted and bad-tempered pensioner. Persuade her to take a pill or eat such unpalatable porridge. Camille, but you're a good talker. Always telling her friend and realizing what that damn porridge had made, bringing her down. But you talk like you're gonna eat it and spoon it. No, what's a spoonful? You'll be lining up for more. And everyone laughed. It especially pissed off the superintendent. After all, if one of the patients was cranky or didn't want to eat or take pills, everyone turned to Camille for some reason. The relatives and the patients themselves often called her to comfort, look after, feed, and help with hygiene. Although before the appearance of this girl in her boarding house, all the questions were solved only by her head Evelyn. Yeah, she knew what they called her behind her back, a particularly venomous snake. But she didn't give a damn about that, no matter what. One day a general came into their institution, and it was the one who suffered from memory loss, and whom Sophia, an orderly, had once looked after. So thought the wench. She didn't just walk him out with Camille. But when it came to thanking a man like that, they both didn't say a word about the superintendent. In the past, Smith would have run to her for advice. And Camille, she's a without Sophia. It's all right. She's still got them dancing. But the opportunity presented itself to the headmistress immediately. On Wednesday, she summoned Camille from duty to her office and ordered her to inform her that she was staying on for the second day. "You see, Nancy, who's changing you? Well, she needs to go to the pension fund right away. There's no one to replace her but you, so Camille will have to work." Camille sighed heavily and realized that she wouldn't be able to have a good rest, but to refuse would mean to fall into the disfavor of the headmistress even more. But the plus side was that she received money for each duty, so she could buy herself a new vegetable. She nodded and lowered her arms. "And it's okay. You'll work. You'll get a decent paycheck later, and I'll give you a bonus." "Thanks, Evelyn." "You're welcome. Go to work. Then you can sleep at night. By the way, 200 hours. If you say anything, I'll let you, but only from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and no more." Camille nodded and left the office, went to the locker room, and sat down on a bench near her locker. She rested her head on the cold iron to cool her thoughts and closed her eyes. I wonder how her old man is doing. Who was he? Wouldn't he take offense at her? At least there's something I can do. Work is work. He's probably got a pension by now. Yes? And if he's sitting there all the time, I'm sure we'll see him again. But Stephen, that was the name of the old man from the park bench, did have a pension, and a lot of it. He'd worked all his life in the organs, and he'd made general. And then he was invited to the department in his native institute of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which he also graduated from, graduating 6th young lieutenant. But recently his family has not been doing well, and he himself did not understand why. The children seem to be settled. They live, however, abroad, often come for holidays, but all the same, he kept his wife long ago. About 10 years ago, she caught pneumonia, and 3 days later, the doctors stated death. They said it was a new flu virus, a stamp against which there is no effective treatment. From that moment, Stephen's own disease began to progress. On the background of nervous disorder, he rapidly began to lose his sight, but let him go blind, but not to see the world. And what am I going to do without Sophia? My children and grandchildren are abroad. They call me, but who needs a blind old man? No one. So he lived alone like a finger. Lately, however, a former pupil of his, Christopher, started visiting him. A good and savvy investigator, up and coming and very promising. Christopher came to his teacher purely by chance for advice, and when he saw his condition, he realized that the old man alone cannot survive. And from that moment he almost every day, well, at least for 5 minutes, but will run away. He'd ask how he was doing. He'd drop off groceries, buy medicine. "Christopher, why are you wasting your money? Young researchers, I know they don't get much, and you're young. You should be spending it on girls for your family, and you spend it on me, and I'll take offense. If you don't take my money, it's over there on the dresser. Take it. It won't offend an old man." And Christopher would take, but would take so 10 or 20 R, but no more than that. Rather to really not offend the old man, but the experience that the retired general was giving him was worthless, and Christopher understood that. So he went and helped, learned and learned, and it paid off. The young investigator was considered the best. They put him on the most difficult and responsible cases, and that was worth a lot. "How are you doing, Christopher?" The general asked him, looking into his eyes like his own child. "There is one thing I cannot give me." And Christopher opened his briefcase folder and took out the next case. "Read its materials, Stephen," and both of them analyzed it to the smallest detail. And the investigator rejoiced like a child. After all, the old and experienced general pointed out to him such points of detail, which he himself would not have paid attention to or would not have thought of these or those conclusions. "But Christopher, you taking a case out of the office, I don't approve of that in any way, as an old professional investigator. You know, it's one thing for me not to tell anyone and another thing. If someone in your department sees it, then you're in trouble too. Yes, I understand, Stephen Williams. But you see, it's one thing for me to give you my word for it. It's another thing to read a witness's statement from a sheet of paper that he held in his hand, signed, and everything. I agree. But be careful. You know that very well. And Christopher was nodding his head. But one day what the old general had so much feared happened. The case was lost. And what was most interesting, Christopher could not understand where he had lost the materials of the new investigation. Either someone had dragged them out of his office or had really taken them to Stephen Williams and simply didn't realize he'd left them behind. This is the second time I've broken into the office and the apartment, and I can't find a damn thing. Maybe he did leave it with the general, but strangely, I never showed him the file. Maybe. And Christopher pounded his fist on the desk with anger. The young investigator's carelessness had played havoc with his office door. Loudly spoken words into the void. Attentive ears in the corridor, his words were heard by the right ears, and a snide smile played on the man's face. There you are, young man, he thought. No need to nurse a thief. You've lost your case. Do me a favor and answer for it, to the full extent of the law. Yeah, well, every man has his detractors. But Christopher had more and more in the department every day. To say what to say, his youth and success, beauty and rapid growth in the career ladder did not give rest. A lot of people intended to mess with him. But who would go against the favorite of the bosses? And the bosses showered Christopher with many favors. Need an apartment? No problem. First in line. Need a car? No problem. Let's get you a used Jeep. Need a summer vacation? It's always you, dear Christopher. And plus a vacation to the minister's boarding house. But Christopher himself wouldn't listen to anyone when they told him it couldn't be like that. You're flying too high. Watch it, boy, you'll fall. Though the investigator himself did not listen to anyone. Intuition and the general's advice won't let me fall. Though Stephen himself saw all this and wanted to tell Christopher to be more careful, but his success, the old man himself believed in his integrity and luck. But in a moment the luck turned away. One day Stephen Williams was called home by telephone, and an unfamiliar voice said quietly to the radio operator, mocking every word, "Well, General." Yes, jumped from this favorite Christopher. They detained him on suspicion of tampering with the case. You know how to raise a replacement, don't you, General? Maybe that's how you earned your general's stripes, too. Who's talking? It's not a joke. Call the 3rd Department yourself, find out for your favorite, and the speaker hung up. And the short beeps sounded in the old investigator's ears for a long time. Stephen stood by the phone and could not believe what he had heard. If it had happened to someone else, he simply would not believe it. But Christopher really did often carry cases with him. Could he have lost them or something? Lost, but there's no way he's a forger. No, we should call. He fumbled for the phone number of his home department and asked the desk clerk to put him through to Deputy Sam. Sam, hi. It's Stephen. Oh, hi, Stephen. How you doing? I'm fine. Why don't you tell me what's going on with Christopher? You don't know. He got arrested. Not for nothing, but for losing a case. But you know, somebody's got a grudge against him. And the lost case was turned into a forgery case. And that's a lot of time. Yeah, I realize that. But it's true that they can't find the case. Well, it was already done, and all the evidence had been collected. A guilty verdict has been written. Just give it to the court and hold it. Get your captain's stars. But no, you show up for work in the morning, and there's a search of the office. Where's the case file? He's not here. And it's a tough case. You know who? Where from? Christopher and I have been talking. Probably about 6 months ago. Stephen lied to avoid hurting his student even more. Who knows who's listening to them? And how could it be used later on in the future? Yes, thought the old man, what a turn of events. And the case of the deputy prosecutor himself was taken on a bribe. And there's a lot of other stuff on top of that. I don't know. Either he lost it willfully or recklessly, but it came from the top. A command to reclassify the loss of investigation materials as deliberate concealment of traces of a crime, and with selfish motives. And this is already, my friend, my dear friend, you understand, threatens a lot of problems. Where is he now? Yes, in the detention center for now. Then it's up to the courts. Okay, thanks. Keep me in the loop if you need anything. Call me anytime." And the general hung up the phone. He suddenly felt sick, and he could hardly stand on his feet, instantly sat down on a chair near the phone. No, he should go outside, get some fresh air. To think. He quickly threw on his jacket and put on his old but still sturdy and warm overshoes and went outside. Stephen Williams liked to think and walk. But even now his head was not working well. Think, old fool, think. How can Christopher be helped now? He didn't know. That Christopher had not falsified the case, of that he was sure. But that he might have lost it. You're a fool, Christopher. Used to dragging your cases around with you. Now he's got it all to himself. And then his heart snapped with unbearable pain. Stephen had long ago attached himself to Christopher like a native son. He regarded his defeat as his own failure. The old man simply sat down on his favorite park benches and cried. He couldn't contain his own emotions, which were overflowing. He probably would not have been as worried about the children as he was about Christopher. At that very minute, Camille was walking through the park from work, having been in the boarding house for 2 days. She could hardly stand on her feet and simply could not believe that the manager had let her go home and had not left her for the 3rd day. "I'm going to die if I stay in this wonderful facility for another 5 minutes. I urgently need to go home to the bathroom, and then I'll sleep for sure until tomorrow morning without the back legs shaking and on dropping my jacket." Camille promptly got out from under herself, all thinking lest the superintendent, God forbid, should notice her and leave her for the 3rd day. She walked along the road and dreamed of taking a shower and falling asleep on the old, but such a favorite couch, sat in the middle, but so comfortable to sleep on, thought Camille, and imagined how the Chinese have a thin woolen blanket with a head and would sleep on it. Strange as it may seem, the second 24 hours passed quietly and peacefully, and probably all because it was a day off. All the superiors had gone home, and the new young doctor was in charge, and therefore, that's why everything went so smoothly. I was able to sleep not 2, but a whole 4 o'clock and earned a chocolate bar from the grateful old lady. That thought made her very happy. What does it take to be happy? Thought the girl, to go home and sing so cheerfully. Despite the overcast weather, her plans were simply not destined to come true. At least not in the next few days, which put her usual way of life upside down. As Camille walked home through the familiar park, she wondered if the nice old man she had eaten ice cream with was waiting for her on the familiar bench. And has he forgotten his invitation? No, he hasn't. There sits my old man. Camille saw a familiar pale figure sitting on a familiar bench in a gray coat and the same gray windbreaker, but as she approached the bench itself, she was simply stunned. She had seen old people crying before, and the picture itself had always looked horrifying. Sadly, now the tears weren't just rolling down her cheeks. They were pouring from the old man's eyes, making the already faded color of his eyes almost colorless. Could this really be? God, how long would these people suffer? But who had hurt him? What had happened in the couple days she'd been working? "Good afternoon, Stephen Williams. Are you crying again? Who hurt you?" The man raised his eyes and looked at her with an unbelieving gaze. How he had grown old and beaten in the last 2 days. It was frightening. Camille sang with fear and a piercing cold, but I tried not to let it show from the situation itself. "Camille, is that you?" "Yes, I'm fine. It's just that you understand, young lady. A student of mine is being accused of a terrible crime he didn't commit. Even though I had warned him to always be careful, he did. Now you blame yourself. Don't be, Stephen Williams. Your pupil is not 5 years old or 10. I think he's an adult. He should know what he's doing and how to do it. Camille, you just don't understand. Christopher was like my own son. Where are your children?" The girl knew very well how to talk to old people. And now she's just trying to change the subject. "Yes, that my children. They have been living in America since 20 years. Their children were born there. That is, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I'm almost 70 years old. My dear Camille, how do I look? But you know, you look about 60, 62 years old. Why don't you want to move in with them? You know America. It's the land of opportunity. Come on, what's the land of opportunity? The decaying West has always been a bunch. There was a note of steel in the old man's voice. Oh, come on, Camille thought. We should just shut this whole thing down for good, or the old man will have a fit. And then they'll say I drove him crazy talking about America. But she really wanted to go to this country of unlimited opportunity and success. And here he is. Camille, I apologize if I answered you rudely. I'm just an old Soviet man, and socialism is closer to me than capitalism. And my children and grandchildren have been asking me to go there for a long time. The pensioner began to tell. A little calmed down, but what to do there? Go to the beach or feed pigeons, so this pleasure, and here is enough. There's nothing to do. And Christopher, well, that's my apprentice. He thought about it for a minute, and the old warrior's logic and intuition were making themselves felt. Stephen really wanted to talk. So he spoke, and the girl listened attentively. She realized that here and now a lucky lottery ticket might fall into her hands, and then the way to America would open up. So my Christopher, he's a talented investigator, works for the police. There's a police station not far from here, and he comes to me for advice on this or that case. He always had one downside. Christopher often took criminal cases from his office and brought them to me. I hope you're not a silly girl and realize it's illegal to take a case out of an investigator's office. And he did. He lost the file. Camille was well aware of the dangers of such a turn. Even to the best investigator, he didn't just lose it. I think it was stolen. And it's a big case, but now the case is gone. And Christopher was charged with falsifying documents and put in jail. Has there really been a verdict yet? Did the girl put her hand over her mouth? No, they're only keeping him in pretrial detention, but they'll bring him to trial. We need to find that lost file. But Stephen Williams, you realize how unrealistic that is. It could be anywhere. I understand, but the day before, he called me and said that he had searched his office and his apartment and found nothing. So he could only come to me with the file and leave it with me. God, what an old fool. I must go home at once. I'm sorry, dear Camille. The situation is such that our essay with you is temporarily postponed. I hope to see you again, but I'll certainly wait for you here at this very spot every morning at 10 o'clock. And raising his hat, the man walked towards the exit of the park. Camille's sleep and fatigue vanished, and she jumped up from the bench and ran after the old man. Stephen Williams, I'm sorry to intrude, but may I help you? I don't know how, but my legs are fast. My eyes can see very well. I can look under the couch or poke around in the corners. You'll have to excuse my insistence. Besides, tomorrow is my day off. I can afford to help you as much as I can. But why not? I'm pleased that you're willing to help out like this. So, I'll do it. I'll have to shut down the whole house, though. If there's nothing to do, at least you can help me clean up. I'll make sure you have lunch. I've got a neighbor who helps me clean, grocery shop, and cook. But I'll help you. She hasn't eaten anything since this morning, and her belly is treacherously disfigured. Stephen directly stopped at that sound. He may not have seen well, but the fact that his hearing remained excellent, there's no arguing about it. Baby, my dinner first, and then everything else. And a hungry soldier is a bad soldier. He walked with this girl to his house and thought how fate often brings people together. Here she had brought him and Christopher together. Now here was this girl, Camille, working in an old people's home. He smiled to himself for the first time in days and thought it was so you old fool wouldn't feel lonely. Should we let her in the house? Yes. People should always stand above the material world. All that bling. That's what he kept saying. Money, power, and pride will ruin you. So respect people if you can't love them. Don't be proud. Never give up. But he must have missed the point somewhere. And now he's walking home with this girl, with the clear intention of feeding her at the very least, helping Christopher and himself find the lost files. How he gets it back is another matter. Come in, Camille here. Put on my granddaughter's slippers. You can see your size. Wash the bathtub, towels, wash your hands. And if you want to take a shower, I'll make you something to eat. I haven't eaten since this morning. Yeah, thanks. Hands, I think. I used to shower at work. Believe me, we're very clean. And don't look poorly dressed and your stomach's churning from hunger for nothing. And she shrugged. It's just the way things are. He poured her a full plate of delicious Navarre borscht and put it on the table. Added sour cream and sliced bread. The second was broth, but also rice and cutlets. Yes, thanks to the neighbor on the cooked quite a lot will be for 3 days. Not with such an appetite as this skinny girl eats. It won't last long. Well, he enjoyed watching her eat, and for some reason Camille reminded him of Christopher, a young and hungry man just like her. Stephen smiled and motioned her a plate of bread. Camille ate and couldn't get enough of such delicious borscht, and with sour cream she hadn't eaten in a long time. Probably not since her parents had died. Only her mother could make such delicious borscht. She was the only one who added garlic to it. She noticed how warmly the old general was looking at her and stopped a little. It really wasn't nice to bang a spoon on a plate like that when you were hungry. Sorry, Stephen Williams. This borscht is just like my mom used to make, except she used to add garlic. But my neighbor, who cooks it the same way at first, added garlic at least from this spice. I got heartburn. So Kay Levi, but that's okay. It's really good. You eat it. But there's also cutlets and side dishes. Well, probably rice. Half an hour later, they were sitting in the kitchen, drinking fragrant tea. Talking like old friends, or at least like teacher and student. Stephen Williams, what else can I do for you? Yes. Here, let's see Christopher's file under the sofa, under the chair, and under the table. Maybe it fell there, and I'll look under the top. Though I doubt it's too big for it to be here. To just lay there like that without anyone seeing it. It's true Christopher's files were always weighty and voluminous. He carefully prepared documents, collected evidence, and in general prepared material on conscience, especially when the case was already going to trial. He wouldn't miss it. That's why Stephen went through the whole apartment for the umpteenth time and found nothing. And Camille had already looked in all the corners, even moved the sofa. But Stephen Williams, I'm sorry, but you've got more dust than cases, especially criminal ones. I'm going to get a floor cloth and a mop, and at least mop your floor. Don't even think about arguing. And then we'll take another look together. But when the floor is dry, they spent the rest of the evening going over the apartment one more time. They even went so far as to rearrange the furniture, but they never found the case. And the old investigator was afraid of one case, simply stolen from Christopher's office. That makes this whole thing look like a setup. He must have crossed somebody's path. What can I say? A smart man is always a threat to a fool, especially when that fool is in power. Excuse me, Stephen Williams. Did you say something? No, I'm sorry, Camille. Just thinking out loud, I guess. Come on, girl. Let's go out to dinner, and I'll throw you something to eat and let you go home. You probably didn't even sleep on the job. Yeah, I worked 2 days. And after your hearty lunch, I'm just so sleepy. Let's go. So are you going to work tomorrow, or what? I might need a day off if things don't change tonight. The old man quickly packed her home-cooked meal and poured a full plate of rice and 4 cutlets. He set out sliced pickles and tomatoes and commanded her to wash her hands and go home to eat that evening. Camille walked with a full bag of groceries, vegetables, fruit, cooked meat dishes, and borscht. Bulk, carrying hands in a 2-liter jar. God, how lucky she was. At least she would be able to eat enough and sleep without waking up until the morning from the hungry carnage in her stomach. Camille walked and rejoiced, but she did not notice her small happiness. The attentive eye of the man who escorted her, or they would give the old general's house, and then had already led her herself up to her single room. It was he who had been involved in Christopher being put in the SI zoo on a trumped-up case, but he was the only one who knew the case, which had been brought against a respected man, and which should not have gone to trial. Lost? No, Christopher had not lost it or destroyed it, nor had it been falsified. The case had simply been stolen. But who did it? No one knew. Neither the man who was closely watching the girl from the corner was not Christopher himself, nor many other participants of this confusing story. And the case was archly important. If it was not found in the house of the young investigator, his arrest would simply be canceled, and he would be released. What wasn't supposed to happen? They didn't take the case to their teacher. The man often talked to himself. Now I asked the same question to my second, and I asked him the same question. He mentally went over this option and realized that it was most likely yes. And now this girl appeared in the house of the old investigator so inappropriately. Apparently, the old devil smelled something wrong and certainly invited her to his house to secretly give the papers. And she was a fool to fall for it. No, we should follow her. What if she's got the file? That could be a very real possibility. This Stephen isn't as stupid as he wants everyone to think. He's old school. He must have sensed he might get a visit. If he gave the girl the case, what kind of case would foretake? That's exactly where the case is. But then his thoughts were interrupted by the horn of a car that jumped out of the corner, which rushed so fast that it fell with mud from the nearest puddle. Oh shit, you're the only thing missing here. Serta fell head over heels. The man began to examine himself, thinking how he in such a form will go to his superiors with a report. But the deed was done, and there was no way to refuse the report. All right, I'll go as it is. Let the high officials see how we work. Simple soldiers of fortune. They sit clean and showered on a leather chair and do not sip in the warmth and dryness of coffee. But when he looked up after a moment, he noticed that Camille had disappeared from his sight. But that's all I needed. Missing the damn girl. What's the matter? She's gone. It's okay. I know where you live. He rushed toward her house and practically caught up with her in the driveway. At that moment, Camille was standing at the doorway, talking to her neighbor, clutching her bag tightly on her shoulder. And there you are looking at it, clutching the bag tightly to you. Surely the case there is an old devil, but I am not a fool, which means that tomorrow we must take a brigade and urgently here. The man didn't even bother to stand under Camille's windows and watch her further. He was sure that it was about her bag and everything else could be done tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow you and old Williams will go to jail, and Christopher will go to jail. And I'm back to being the best investigator in the department. You shouldn't have moved me out of my position. John. It was John, who'd been losing his long way with his teeth. Now he's just out of a job. But he didn't like being out of a job. And he found a trivial way to steal a serious case from Christopher and frame it for forgery. But the amazing thing is, the case itself didn't even have to be stolen. One day it simply disappeared, and no one knew where it was or who might have taken it. Everyone in the department looked at each other askew, but no one could point a finger at the thief. And now John simply turned around and went back to headquarters to report the results of his investigation to his superiors. Camille, having had enough to eat, fell asleep like a baby. Stephen, however, could not sleep. He lay in bed wondering what he should do. Next, shedding tears in the park on a bench was silly. It wouldn't get Christopher out of jail because he was turning from side to side and thinking who could have stolen the case and how it would now turn out for his student. But whatever the version of subsequent events, none of them would be the most promising for Christopher. He's still going to jail, and someone's gonna get another star. Shouldn't we wait for that someone to come out and then fight? That's probably the right thing to do. Knowing your enemy is better than fighting windmills. But it doesn't work for me. A day in jail, a year lost. So tomorrow I will take action, and Stephen closed his eyes. Surprisingly, he fell asleep quickly. though he had not wanted to sleep before. At night, he dreamed of his dead mother for the first time. She stood on the doorstep of their apartment and pointed to the closet. "Mommy, I'm so happy to see you. But where are you pointing? What are you trying to tell me?" The man looked at the corner his mother was pointing at and was surprised. There stood an old wooden mop, and on it was his shirt, on which, as unaccountably Pavlovsky, were 4 stars of the captain. Wow! Did his mother, and in the other world, let him in the uniform on the floor rags? Yes, she's like that. Maybe. Mother never wanted her son to follow in his father's footsteps and join the militia. Stephen's dad was killed by gangsters when he was a year old. Since then, his mother tried her best to keep him away from the police. It came to the point that his mother even tore rags into his uniform and washed him with them. She checked the windows, tied in the vegetable garden, bushes, tomatoes. It came to absurdity, but now she did not want to laugh at her son's choice of his profession, but warned him about something. In his sleep, Stephen lifted a corner of the floor cloth, and a huge rat jumped out at him. At that second, the man woke up in a cold sweat. Well, there's your answer to the question. Christopher definitely did not lose the case and did not falsify his case stolen by the rat. Stephen smiled to himself. It was like a stone had been dropped in his soul. He wiped his sweaty forehead with his hand and stood up. There were still a lot of things to do. Make coffee, eat, call Camille, and ask how she was doing. Even though she wasn't, she's probably still asleep. Anyway, the most important thing is to find that rat that jumped on him in his sleep. And I'll bet you're the rat. You're the rear guard. Your own investigators would never do that. At least not a decent investigator. You're like a rat out from under a rag, and you're gonna bite. No, I didn't get killed in Syria or Iran. I didn't go crazy on opium. But here I'm going to be driven crazy by my own rats. The general got up and put his feet in his slippers and went into the kitchen to put the kettle on. It was a set morning ritual that set the whole day. He didn't start his day without a cup of tea. Stephen stood on the balcony of his apartment, drinking tea and thinking how he should proceed. What to do? To begin with, go to talk to the chief. Good thing he will accept me and introduce me into the investigation group. And then we'll see. Stephen often liked to talk out loud to himself. No wonder who could hear him in the apartment. Only his flowers and his fish. But neither of them can say anything to anyone. Christopher inherited that habit from him, and it's played havoc with him. What if he's not allowed to be investigated? No way. I mean, he's known to the department for a long time. He's a recognized authority. Christopher's his apprentice. They'll say you're pulling for your favorite. But Stephen never had a favorite among the kids or the students. Yes, he might have singled out a talented investigator or forensic scientist, but no one was his mind or his servant. One should be valued for one's earned talent, and no more, and not for patronage. And they'll tell you, friend, that it's a personal interest, and voila. Okay, I'll walk around, and then I'll see. I'll go with what I got. The man went outside and raised his head to the sky. He said hello to his late wife in his mind. Up there in heaven. That's how he always started his day. It was a kind of prayer, but praying is good. I have to go help Christopher now. I wonder how that Camille is. How did she sleep? Was everything good? Maybe I should go over and see her. After all, she wrote him yesterday on a piece of paper her address. And by the way, it is at the end of the park, that old 5-story building. And the second floor is not high. The old man won't have to walk up high. Well, I'll drop by since you invited me. They're not in the spotlight. I could use a face in my business. But approaching Camille's house, the old man was dumbfounded under the entrance where the girl lived. There were several brigades of militia. Wow, the old man thought. As they say on The Catcher, and the beast runs. Really, it's all strange. On the one hand, maybe it's not for Camille. This time Camille woke up to the fact that her already flimsy doors were banging, probably with all hands and feet. At least, the rumble was unbelievable. Why should I be surprised? After all, John Barnett had taught his superior so much about everything that he almost wanted to checkmate her and detain her. John, understand, thieves and charlatans are worth taking out for profit. At night they are not. Igor Valentinovich, there's no need to be in such a hurry. We'll go in the morning. Let's take a warm one out of bed. Understand, you're a sleepy man, more talkative. He doesn't yet understand anything that's going on around him. It's not like someone who's been walking around all day nervous and on edge. I hope you understand. Yes, I do, John. I do. I just can't wait to close this case. I mean, it's our employee and an embarrassment to the department. Yeah, well, it's an embarrassment to the department. You'd rather have stars on your epaulets or a new position in the ministry. And read it. Don't tell me. Your power and counsel shot my grandfather and my grandmother together as white guards and servants of the Empress. So we know your bloodthirsty motives. Of course, the captain did not tell his superior all this. Why spoil his opinion of himself beforehand? Well, John, of course you apologize if I've been rude and unfair to you before. You see, this Christopher, he's really solved a lot of cases. But no offense, but yours has always been an honorable one. Second. Actually, it's first place now. I'm glad to hear that. And you know, I always try to do my best work, although I'm not always so lucky. Why do you have to do it by rote? Garnett thought and smiled through his teeth at his boss. And now, since morning, he had been leading the detention brigade in their neck of the woods to Camille's address. Yes, it was her door that the riot police were now breaking in and trying to kick down that flexible barrier. Who is there? Camille shouted, as she had never shouted in her life, afraid that she would be swept away by this wave of hatred. John heard her scream and signaled the riot police to stop. That's the kind of amputee they get. But what to do is that he's the boss and only he can make the decision. It's the police. Camille, open up. The girl tangled herself more tightly in the old robe and opened the door. Looking through the slit at the big men with machine guns standing on the landing, she did not understand what could have happened. And through the dream, she simply did not know how to act. Who are you? I'm John Barnett, police captain, and I have a warrant to search your apartment, and I can either leave you alone or arrest you. And believe me, I have every reason to do so. It's strange, John. I've always considered myself a man of intelligence. And you just barge into this nice girl's apartment and search the place. Where are the witnesses? The witnesses? Where's forensics? The words of Stephen Williams made John not only turn his whole body back, but almost jump in the air. Yeah, thought the investigator. There's the main man in this whole group. Christopher couldn't have so cleverly thought it up all by himself and arranged it. Out of nowhere. It's the catcher and the hunted. No, it would be more accurate to say a wolf. Here you are, Comrade General Stephen Williams. I was thinking of coming to see you. I hope it's not a search. Imagine that. With all legal grounds, to visit and legally inspect your apartment. I hope, as a retired general, you're okay with accepting your colleague, but with all love and open arms. But you show me the warrant that will open my doors for you. That's one thing. And two, why are you banging on this sweetheart's door? The bandit didn't let John finish his sentence, impudently interrupting the old General. John, I see such a concept as politeness and respect for old colleagues is not familiar to you, and you don't forgive me. Scared long ago, and Christopher yours. John was. He wanted to say that it was he who had set Christopher up, but he bit his tongue in time. Aha, thought the old general. So that's where the missing case came from. But he didn't say anything out loud, but only smiled. I can handle it myself somehow. Not such an important bird. He's a fool. If you started it like this. The general smiled and looked at Camille. Camille, they haven't told you anything yet, except that they almost broke the door down. That's good. So there's nothing. If they decided to scare you like that, and then interrogate you. It's old school. Even though you, John, should realize that there are a lot of new methods to get a client to talk. You're still working the old school way. Stephen Williams, are you part-time now? As a defense attorney or covering for an accomplice? An accomplice in what? John, what can you charge me with? That Christopher stole the case, gave it to you, and you gave it to Camille yesterday. Not for nothing. She was pulling a bag home yesterday, and she was holding it with her hands so tight, it looked like she was carrying diamonds in it. So, John, you're a fool. I mean, really, you dumped the whole case file. Just like that from the doorstep to the first person you saw. John was shaken, and especially when behind his back the riot policeman started joking at him and laughing, saying that you are a fool, you investigator. You don't understand what's going on. Stop it, John shouted at the law enforcers. You are here as help, not as counselors. We don't advise you home. We're just stating a fact. Fool, what are you doing, getting involved in this case? The OLN team leader said to him, and turned around and left the apartment. Guys, let's get out of here. Let this investigator himself fight with old men and women. And under the loud cackling of the company of big OMON men, he began to descend the stairs. John's face was covered with red spots. The investigator began to choke with anger. He realized how much he'd missed. Now, Stephen Williams, although you are known here, I'm going to ask you to leave the apartment and not interfere with the investigation. The investigator tried to take a few deep breaths, so we don't screw this up, and pointed his hand to the old general at the door. But he was not going to leave, and began to dig in the inner pocket of his Syrian coat. Look at this lawyer's license. I want to represent Camille if she now verbally agrees to have me as her attorney. You don't mind? And he looked intently at the decayed and frightened Camille, who at these words nodded her head. Yes, I give this your verbal consent. Let Stephen Williams represent my interests, and you don't you dare barge in like that. And we're already here. So, please, a warrant for the address of your apartment, and I'll ask you first if there are any illegal items, drugs or weapons in the apartment, or any investigative cases. You're not in a hurry, are you? Okay, think about it. Stephen Williams, though a retired general, is a smart man, but he's not all-powerful. Yes, Camille, think it over and try to be honest. Stephen Williams smiled at her and nodded his head. Say what you want to say. Don't be afraid of anything. Camille looked at the old general perplexed and nodded her head. She began to tell him that she was not hiding anything. She has no such illegal items, and even less criminal affairs. She now realized the reason why the investigators had burst into her house since morning. But she didn't let it show, and the girl was good. At once she understood what was going on. The general thought to himself, I didn't show it. If you had a little help, you could be a good specialist. But I'd like to help Christopher, and then I'd like to do Camille. Maybe put her somewhere else, like the business house, for example, in their department, or a clerk at the courthouse. Better pay and less work. Otherwise, she's skin and bones. In the meantime, John was going through the girl's apartment from head to toe, but he realized that in this miserable situation there was no case. There was simply nowhere to hide it. An old couch and a dresser, a small closet and a couple of chairs, a table and everything in the kitchen, a table and a couple of stools, an old refrigerator. His men had already dug through everything, but they looked at the chief with bewilderment. They said, sorry, there's nothing. It's a real case. How could there be on that criminal authority could be the size of a considerable? You can't hide it under the carpet or shove it under the floor. John kicked the corner of the couch with his foot and turned around and waved to the guys, saying, let's finish up. Thanks, Camille. Sorry, I don't know your middle name. For your cooperation. Tomorrow, please come to this address and familiarize yourself. Sign the record of today's actions. But I have work tomorrow. I can't. Well, nothing the day after tomorrow then. The report can wait, said John. And he thought to himself that it was not worth displaying this zero result in front of his superiors. That John hadn't found anything. That's how shamefully you run. Stephen, though, was a retired general and realized that his words were a display of lawlessness, but he couldn't take a jab at his colleague. True, Barnett did not say anything to such remarks of his, but only slowed his step, shooting his eyes in his direction. "Wait, old man. I'll see you again." When the door slammed behind him, Stephen Williams sat down on a chair in Camille's room and looked around. Poverty in all things, not unlike his general's mansion. "Thank God you made it. Don't worry. I hope you realize what they were looking for." The man's voice sounded calm and confident. "Yes, I do. And for nothing. I don't have it and couldn't have it." "Okay, let's make it so you're off today." The girl nodded her head and sat down on the bed. "Then let's get some rest, and I'll take care of business. If anything, I'll come over to your place, if you don't mind. You're at work tomorrow. Then I'll wait for you the day after tomorrow on a bench in the park." And nodding his head, he got up and left the apartment, going to the familiar police department. If the fish is rotting, one must act with one's head. I'll find out everything, and then be what happens. But I hope I can still get Christopher out of jail. I'd hate to see such talent go to waste. What can I say? A week later, Christopher walked out of the detention center and stood on the porch and raised his head to the sun. He stood and reveled in that feeling of the sun and the wind on his face with the freedom he had almost lost. Christopher reveled in the strength he felt in his hands that were not handcuffed. Now he understood all of his charges who had gone to prison through his fault or the fault of his coworkers. "Hello, Christopher. But here you are free." Stephen Williams stood outside the detention center with Camille and smiled. "Stephen Williams, darling, you're my teacher." "Is that really you?" The boy promptly ran down the steps and with outstretched arms embraced his old mentor, accepting him like a father. He stood and hugged his old teacher and wept, unashamed of his own tears as he cried, "Do you need this now? You shouldn't hold back your feelings." The man hugged the young man and patted him on the back. After a few minutes, he raised his face to the general and a smile played on it. "I now understand all my under-trial detainees, how hard it is for them, how hard it is to wear handcuffs. It is simply unbearable. Now you're on the outside, and everything will be fine. You know I didn't take the case, and if I did, I couldn't lose it. We got a case. Let's go. First, we'll go to my place, pray, talk, and then we'll go again. By the way, Camille, she's my new friend, and she helped me in many ways, particularly in your release. So you owe your freedom to her to a certain extent. Thank you, dear Camille. I am very, very grateful. But why was I released? Stephen Williams, I honestly don't understand a damn thing. The cell door just opened, and they told me to pack up and get out. And here I am. Is that a bad thing? My young friend, no, but it just puts me in a bit of a quandary, so to speak. Is this all a hoax? How real is this? Real, my friend. Very real. Now, come on over here and help me eat. My neighbor cooked me some delicious borscht, potatoes, cutlets. Jesus, after the government food, it all looks like food of the gods. The Trinity rode in the cab and kept silent. Each thought about his own, about the frailty of fate, when even the smartest and most experienced investigator can make a mistake that costs him his freedom, afraid and throwing things into the washing machine. Christopher sat down at the table and inhaled the aroma of making this borscht. How delicious it was. Christopher worked with a spoon. It was like he hadn't eaten for years, and he wanted to eat for years to come. Christopher, you're not borscht. There's a pot of borscht over there. And then there's the second course. So there's a spoonful, and a plate, and I'm lying down. You can't imagine how good it all tastes after the government carco. I believe you. But by the way, there is still a second one there, so no hurry and please. Go and make tea. Christopher looked carefully at his teacher. In his eyes read a mute question. Stephen smiled and wagged his finger at Christopher. Christopher, I hope this case will teach you something in the future. It's not a good idea to drop a case anywhere, much less take it out of the office. It'll do more than teach me. Burn that simple truth into my forehead with a hot iron." And the guy tapped himself on the forehead. The general himself was surprised at how simple and complex this case was at the same time. But every case teaches us something. He looked at Christopher and asked quietly, "Remember where you put the case?" For the life of me, I can't remember. If I did, I guess none of this would have happened. That's true. By the way, I say hello to you. Our cleaning lady Nancy's in Notto. But how did she get in? Oh, you fool, Christopher. Yes, in a very direct way. Camille and Christopher looked at each other uncomprehendingly. Both really did not understand how a simple cleaning lady could be involved in the loss of criminal materials, and even such an important criminal authority as the Bull. So, I'll start in order. The file was found yesterday, and you probably put it on top of the closet. But the one with the documents, so to speak, you put it there and safely forgot, because you never put the case there. Consequently, your brain didn't register that information. And again, your fault is that you put it on the top. But badly, the case simply fell into the gap between the wall of the closet and the wall. And imagine, it stayed there safely hidden from everyone. I'm a Turk, aren't I? You said that, and now I remember. Yes, I put it upstairs. I thought I'd put it in the cupboard and lock it. But I got distracted, and as luck would have it, I forgot about it. Well, not about it, but where I put it. And it fell. Although probably when I was moving furniture, and how did I not think to look in the space between the closet and the wall? Well, really. And Christopher tapped himself on the head. He only now remembered that he had actually put the case on the cabinet, and then he had been distracted and had safely forgotten where he had put it. And the case might have fallen behind the cabinet itself when he was closing the office door. A trivial oversight by any human being, which turned into imprisonment. But thank God, everything was found, and the truth came out. And Nancy, thanks to her cleanliness, opened your office, decided to clean it. And get this, she looked behind the cabinet and saw the lost file. But she doesn't know who lost what, so she took it to the duty officer, although our warrant officer himself, and you know very well what happened to him, almost had a heart attack, even though there was probably a squeal for the whole department. Yeah, that's how our cleaning lady solved the case better than any investigator. She got a bonus and a certificate of merit for it, by the way. And the order to release you, well, that's it. Jesus, who would have thought it would turn out like this? Christopher really didn't understand how it happened. But how was Camille involved in all this? Christopher immediately liked this girl, so he decided to draw her attention to himself. Yes, she was with me when I went into the office, and she was the one who told your cleaning lady to clean behind the closet. Christopher, you really have no idea. It was purely serendipitous. It's just that at my job, they clean all the corners behind all the nightstands and closets, once a week, so to speak, general cleaning. But I got into a conversation with the cleaning lady and asked her if they clean out the closets, and she jumped at the idea and said that it really wouldn't hurt to chase the cobwebs in Christopher's office. Yeah, scare the wicked with a broom. Yeah, you never know where you're gonna find something and where you're gonna lose it. But by the way, why is John Barnett on this case? Who knows? Just jealousy or something. I don't know. It's probably jealousy, by the way. Before you got here, he was the best in the department. Well, in quotes, so to speak. No wonder his zeal and tenacity could be channeled. He'd have been worth a fortune. He could ride you too. He could, but he didn't have a teacher like you. That's why he's messed up. The man doesn't know how to get his own way in front of his bosses. All right, Christopher, I hope we all learn a lesson. You don't have to lose your business. Clean behind the closet and the couch more often. But to me, what seems like a complicated case can be a trivial household occurrence and easily solved with a simple broom. And everyone laughed. Okay, Stephen Williams, thank you for your hospitality, your lunch. I'll pick it up later. And now it's time for me to go home. My bosses gave me 3 days off when I got out of detention, so I'm just gonna sleep it off. Camille, you hang in there with my dear teacher, and I have to go home tomorrow for 24 hours. Camille, can I walk you home? Christopher was as embarrassed as a boy to say such simple words. Yes, in fact, Camille was also embarrassed by the words of the young investigator. After all, the attention of such a guy was new to her. I don't mind. If all 3 of us go through the park and miss ice cream, and I'm a fool, tapping myself on the forehead. Stephen Williams, I promised you a GSS, but I never delivered. How unkind of me. It's okay. I'm definitely gonna get that girl that coffee. I owe her my freedom, after all. Christopher almost jumped out of his chair and ran into the hallway to get dressed. The old general looked at Camille and quietly, so that Christopher did not hear, said, "Look at him. He is not a bad guy, and he needs a girl like you, not spoiled, who knows the value of money and labor. If he likes me, he's nothing compared to me. Trust my experience. I know Christopher, and I can tell you they'll like you. So don't be a slave. This could be your happiness." Camille nodded her head and went into the hallway to get dressed. She really liked it. Christopher. Handsome, funny. You can tell he's reliable and smart. You can't go wrong with someone like that. The girl really wanted him to walk her home, and then ask her out on a date, take her to a cafe on the street, ask her to marry him. She was already in the clouds, and she didn't notice the smile on her face. Oh, I see, Camille is smiling. That means everything's all right. Stephen Williams went out into the corridor to see the young people off and closed the door behind them. He said a quiet prayer to himself. He had never prayed before, not really. Probably at the funerals of his mother and wife. And so, but when he had asked for Christopher. Yeah, Stephen, you'll soon be a devout man and start bowing before icons, or you'll go into a monastery, a novice to himself. But at the same moment, he thought that it really would be good to go to church, to put a candle to God and ask for forgiveness. But he was raised in the era of developed socialism, and they were not taught to pray and ask the higher powers for help, and for nothing. I want to pray for these young people. May everything be well with them, and they will invite me to their wedding, and maybe even to their christening. He smiled and waved to the young people from the window. Christopher and Camille waved back as they came out of the driveway. Good man, Stephen Williams. He really is a pro at what he does. Can you believe it? Almost 45 years in the force, and has raised many generations of good investigators. And he has children, I understand, overseas. Yes, 2 sons, but they didn't want to carry on his work, even though my teacher's grandfather and great-grandfather were. Also, investigators worked in the KGB, even in the ranks of Tsarist Russia. It's like a huge potential. You have no idea. I can't imagine. I'm just a nurse in a nursing home for the elderly. I don't know much about investigators from movies and TV shows. Camille, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to offend you. I'm sure there's a need for people like you. I mean, maybe I'll be a decrepit and infirm old man, and I'll need you to take care of me. It could happen, but it's possible. If we get married and live happily and prosperously until we're old, we will. I'm not asking you to get married right away, but at least I'll ask you out on a date. If you don't mind, maybe our relationship will really make a strong family. I'd really like that. You really like me. Camille said it, and then she flinched. What an idiot. Why did she ask that? Now she looks like a complete idiot. Just like that, she'd let the guy know she was asking him to marry her. The girl blushed and lowered her eyes. Christopher, sorry, I thought about it and said it out loud. It didn't come out right. Camille, you know, I like girls like you, straightforward, who say what they think, and then just apologize like that. I like you, and I'm not saying that out of gratitude for saving me. You're directly sympathetic. In fact, let's go to the coffee shop for coffee. We did. They sat in the cafe almost until it closed, and then they just walked around the city at night. breathing in the smell of fall and fallen leaves, not noticing the cold. For the first time, Camille fell in love with autumn with its yellow leaves, and the former leaves and chestnuts underfoot begging for rain, and the first frosts that burned her face so much, forcing her to breathe through her nose, inhaling puffs of vapor. Christopher, thank you for a wonderful evening, and I'll tell you frankly, for the first time I love the fall, which I used to hate because of its mud, slush, and dampness. And now that she wanted to say when you're around, I'm not afraid of anything, but I bought my tongue. You know, Camille, stopping in time is a great skill. And don't argue. Even if you meant to say something nice, I think my wife should have that skill. And Christopher meant it. He realized that Camille was a wonderful person, even though she was dressed poorly and unfashionably for the weather, but all that was fixable. And it was his job to take care of this girl, who had certainly had her life shaken and seen more than once, but it had not done her heart callousness. He gently pulled her to him and kissed her forehead. Camille, in this embrace of a strong young man, simply melted. She wanted to stand like that and not go anywhere. Not even not to move, not even to breathe. She was simply afraid to scare away her own happiness. But the guy, as if he had read her thoughts, and a little pulling the girl away from him, quietly said, "You know, Camille, it's time for you to go to bed. After all, tomorrow I have to work for 24 hours, and the day after tomorrow I will meet you in the morning from work and invite you to breakfast. You're in. I mean, what girl wouldn't want to have breakfast with a guy like you? And you don't have to worry. You won't lose me. But you're freezing and catching a cold in the wind. Maybe, but then you'd have to give me warm milk, a thermometer, and raspberry jam. And that's so nice. All right." Laughs. "You're a dreamer. Go home. Here's your entrance. I hope I won't have to walk you to your apartment. Don't you want to? I should, and I already have." I was going to be offended. But Christopher kissed her softly on the lips and turned her around and pushed her toward the door. The girl did not argue. In fact, she was very tired for the day, and her immediate desire was to take a shower and just fall on the bed, not even taking off the warm robe. She walked up to her floor, and a smile played on her face. She had someone she loved and loved her now. At least Camille really hoped that everything would work out fine for them. Christopher saw the windows of Camille's apartment light up, and smiling, he turned around and went home. It was easy and simple for him. After all, the guy realized he had everything in this life, and not just a house and a job, but also a faithful teacher, mentor who will pull out of trouble, will not abandon. There is now a fighting girlfriend with whom you can build a happy family. But what is not beauty? And he woke up a pile of fallen leaves that fluttered in the air, with golden fireworks. How nice it is to go home to your hometown in the evening like this and realize that you are loved and waited for. I guess that's what happiness is supposed to look like, thought Christopher, walking home. The only one who certainly didn't sleep well that night was Investigator John. He'd never had a failure like this before. Yes, he had his little errors and shortcomings, but he could always turn most of them to his advantage. And what will happen now? The investigator was talking to himself, standing on the balcony and smoking a cigarette. He realized that Christopher was on good account with his superiors, even with the ministerial leadership. Plus, the charges against him were not confirmed. That's how he got even. Maybe I'll leave the militia and go up north. My uncle asked me to go there a couple years ago. Well, no. He wanted to get promoted, get a star. Now I'm sure these atrocities are being torn off me. Christopher won't just let it go. What's Christopher got to do with it? He ain't got nothing to do right now. And the old general will definitely raise it with the ministry and demand my dismissal. But John didn't even realize that none of the participants in this story cared about him. Christopher forgave him and forgot his prank long ago. Camille flew on the wings of love, and Stephen Williams simply let the situation go. It was the old general who understood how self-inflicted guilt could be devastating, often to the point of insanity and suicide. Serves him right. The man thought, standing on the balcony and gazing up at the starry sky. "You don't want to dig a hole for your colleague." He smiled at the night sky and the stars and thought to himself, what is his wife doing in the other world? How is his mother doing there? Stephen loved his women, and to that little list he had now added another name, Camille. The man stood staring into the darkness. He wished he could just, like in the song, part the clouds, or rather that darkness with his hands, and light it up. Day and night. A young and beautiful girl who must have suffered a lot in her life. "Nothing, my dear Camille. I won't leave you for nothing. No matter how much you may be against it, no matter how much Christopher himself may oppose it. I'll talk to my people at the ministry tomorrow. Here's a better place for you, but I'll leave my apartment to you. That's for sure. My girl." He'd long ago decided to leave the apartment to someone else. For some reason, he didn't want to describe it to the kids. And why should he? The children live on their own, separately across the sea. If none of his sons wanted to continue his dynasty of explorers, why give the apartment to them? He taught them, gave them a path in life. And as he saw it, the children settled down in America, and all he was left with were old albums and memories. A few months later, Christopher and Camille applied to the registry office and invited to the celebration. All their colleagues and friends, and the witnesses were Stephen Williams and Molly, Camille's best friend. It was a beautiful wedding that many people will remember. What can I say? All the wishes were sincere and from the heart. As for John Barnett, he didn't wait to be appealed against and thrown out of the authorities in disgrace. He wrote a report of his own accord and simply left for the north. And he did the right thing, thought John, looking out the window of the train, respecting him to the cold lands. I would simply not have been allowed to work there. They'd be watching me like rats, and my uncle would help me get a warm job. At the due date, Camille gave birth to twin girls and a boy. The older boy was named Stephen and the girl Sophia. You have an old general who not only helped Christopher in life, but also introduced him to Camille. Stephen Williams, you will definitely be our godfather, and don't even think of arguing, Camille said, rocking the babies in the stroller. Oh yeah, Camille, I wouldn't dream of it. My children have not made me realize that I can't refuse. Grandchildren. At least I'll be able to hear you and Christopher in the cradle. But you trust the old general with your treasures. He winked at her and looked at the babies. How much do they look like their parents? May they do well. He wished the kids in his mind, I will. Don't doubt it. There will be times when you'll have to babysit them. And I'll ask you for it, if you agree, of course. Not that I'll do it. I'll ask you to leave the kids with me for the weekend, so you and Christopher can have a vacation. Believe me, Camille, children are an incredible blessing, and thank the higher powers that you are in my life. Stephen brushed a stingy falcon tear from his eye, trying not to let Camille see his weakness. No need to show how lonely he was, though he was lonely. When these two get older, they'll start walking. So you old goat, you'll be running away from them yourself. From such thoughts, the man only smiled and leaned over the stroller and adjusted the blanket. Let them sleep. Sleep is the highest good which is given to man. And then we all grow up to be in a hurry, not realizing why. Is it worth the effort? Stephen Williams and Christopher said that John, the investigator who prosecuted him, he quit. Yeah, filed a report and moved up north. I think he said he had an uncle up there. At least be honest. Seems to me a guy like that can't have any relatives. Come on, you yourself realize that there are many people like John. Just some of them are not in power, do not wear uniforms. Stephen looked at Camille and marveled at how smart she was beyond her years. And even though she had no education, her reasoning was like that of a person who not only had several diplomas behind her, but had lived a life, or rather, several lives. That's how I won't believe in heredity, which is given by past generations. You believe in everything. And it's good that he doesn't. But I'll try to raise a general out of this boy. But at least as long as I have strength, I'll raise him a real cadet, like they raised me at the academy. What about the girl? Or will you neglect her? No, never. She'll make a real battle buddy. That's how you are to Christopher. What's wrong with that? They both laughed, but immediately stopped. You don't want to wake little babies while they're sleeping so sweet. For the parents, for the godfather, because in them, each saw the continuation of their own life, of their own meaning. Returning home from his apprenticeship, Stephen Williams went to a small temple and put a candle for the repose of his favorite women. As promised, I asked the Lord for the best for everyone, what to say for Camille and Christopher. Thank you, Lord, I haven't seen you here before. The priest's words sounded unexpected, and Stephen even trembled. From what a few drops of relaxed wax sprang on his hand. I hardly ever come in here. I just baptized 2 twins here recently. But yeah, I remember you. You were the godfather. But you should come by more often, especially on Sunday. Come to the morning service. Our choir sings beautifully. And in general, you should go to God. Take my word for it as a retired colonel. Stephen Williams looked at the priest in surprise, but did not say anything. Apparently, everyone has his own destiny. Some go north, others turn to God. Maybe he did. Thank you. I'll try to come, but I can't promise. You don't have to promise. You just come. Stephen turned and walked out of the church. And the priest looked at his back through the open church doors for a long time, and then quietly crossed himself, wishing God's protection. Every man needed protection. Whether he believed or not, it did not matter. The road to the temple also led him. Not at once it was worth to pass not one war, loss of wife and betrayal of children to believe in the Lord, to take the tonsure and forgive all his offenders and eventually find peace. Lord, have mercy, save and keep. And it's time for us to think about worldly matters. And the priest went about his business, caring for each of his parishioners, of course, to the best of his ability. Another lost soul has come to God, he thought. So God's work is not in vain. And we are all his helpers. He mentally smiled at his own thoughts and once again thanked God for giving him happiness. Each person, apparently, has his own happiness. Subscribe and click the bell.
Julia decided at an early age. Girls are either beautiful or smart. The girl knew very well she could choose, and she chose to be smart. The example of her older sister Helen was in front of her eyes. Everyone around her admired her beauty. Her hair was light blonde, silky clean, her eyes mermaid green, a figure they call model-like. Helen from an early age was focused only on her looks. She read a lot, but it was fashion magazines with advice on makeup, diet, and so on. And Valen's girlfriends were exactly the same. Julia thought they were pretty, frivolous, fools. The mother, who lived alone 2 daughters, had high hopes for the eldest. If you marry Helen, we'll live happily ever after. Julia then was still a very young girl, studied in the 4th or 5th grade. The girl was frankly perplexed. How can one put the responsibility for her happiness and well-being on some other person? Did the mother, who had been burned herself, not make the right conclusions? Once Julia asked her mother directly, "You married your father for his money too. And he left us, went to a younger and prettier, even and left nothing to you or the children, because she had a good appetite. And now you teach the tape the same thing, so that it is the same." Splash, nodded Mom. Helen is quite different from us. First of all, young, and secondly, she is much prettier than me. And she has me. It was me who had to come to everything myself, and I'll give you a hint and teach you everything. It will be good for you too, if you listen to me. Julia only sighed heavily. Her mother was beautiful, kind, but too frivolous. Both her mother and Helen lived with rose-colored glasses on their eyes. They all dreamed of a beautiful life. They believed that looks were the determining factor in a woman's success. But that's about it. Julia differed from her peers in her character, always being pragmatic, responsible, farsighted. And she clearly understood that to achieve something in this life, you have to work hard. And the options that her mother and older sister had in mind, the rich male benefactors, were all unreliable, fragile, illusory. Helen jokingly called her little sister a nerd. Her mother was always trying to remake Julia, to impose her point of view on her daughter. The most interesting parent sincerely believed that she wished her child well. "I'm worried about your future." "Well, how can you not understand? You're beautiful. We got such. You got the best of me and your father. When you finish school, we'll find you a wealthy fiancé. Just don't be like that." Then like cheerful and smiling. "No, thanks. After school, I will go to study economics." Julia answered. "Well, do you know what the competition is?" Helen always started to argue at this point. "You either have to be 7 eyes in the head there, or you have to have a good deal." "Yeah," Mom sighed. "We can't afford commercial education, and you can't get in for free." But Julia, trying not to listen to the arguments of her sister and mother, strived for her goal. Day and night she sat over textbooks, looked for additional courses on the internet, mostly free, because her mother, who worked as a cashier in the local supermarket, had no money for her daughter's education, and her father almost did not participate in the children's lives, as he had a new family. No, he still transferred some pennies, but everything was limited to that. No communication, no support or help in difficult situations. Julia knew from childhood that he could not be counted on. The girl deep down wanted at least once to meet and talk to her second parent. It seemed to her that perhaps the character she went just in him, because the mother and Helen Julia did not resemble at all. But he did not seek to meet his daughters, and Julia, she didn't want to impose. And it was scary to face indifference, or even worse, dislike of a native man. Her father was a businessman who owned a chain of stores. She had no time at all for student parties, going to clubs, and other such entertainments. Sometimes, of course, she wanted to go out and have some fun. But the girl realized that every minute counted. Her time was too precious. Besides, there was no money. Her mother tried to replenish her daughter's card with a small amount every month. Julia knew that it was a significant part of her parents' salary and was very grateful to her. It was not enough, very little. But still, it was the help from her mother that allowed Julia to stay afloat. Especially after the 3rd year, when suddenly something in the university clinic changed, and students were obliged to pay for the dormitory. And before, you could live there for free. Julia saved money on literally everything. But she didn't have time. She knew that she was going to her goal, which meant that sooner or later everything would be fine. Everything will be as she had dreamed. But on New Year's Eve, there was an event that made Julia reconsider her plans and turned her whole life upside down. It happened at that hectic time when before the New Year students try to pass all credits in time to start the winter session after the holiday without debts. Julia was just preparing for a credit in economic history when she received a call from her sister. Helen's picture popped up on the screen. On it, the girl smiled widely and looked like a star. Julia immediately realized something was wrong. Helen would not call her at the 3rd hour of the night. It's her. Julia is awake, studying for her exams. And her sister should be having her 7th dream by now. Mom's in trouble. Helen's voice rang through the phone. It seems that she was close to hysterics. "Come over. What's wrong?" Julia felt her limbs grow young and her stomach felt empty for some reason. Anxiety squeezed her heart ice cold, and a bus hit her with a rusty hand. What when she was alive? But it was impossible to get any intelligible answers from the Italian. She was already sobbing and sobbing into the tube, dropping only a few insignificant phrases. Mostly they were wails about how she was scared and bad now. As if the trouble happened in the evening, but Alina was informed only now, just a couple of minutes ago. And she immediately dialed her sister. Of course, there was no talk about any credits and exams at that moment. In the morning, Julia took the first flight home. She was almost the only passenger at the bus station at such an early hour. Julia found her sister in a terrible state, her hair shot up, her face swollen with tears. In her arms, she held her youngest daughter, a very young Molly. Helen was already a mother of many children. Her eldest son Larry, then 2 girls, Christina and Molly. None of the fathers were involved in raising the children. Princes, sons of rich parents, refused to raise offspring and bathed in pennies with the elements. With Helen, they were just having fun, with nothing serious in mind. And that one kept stepping on the same rake on purpose to get pregnant in the hope of finding a happy, strong family. If something happens to her, how will I be alone with them? Helen looked at Julia with confused eyes, as if expecting her to offer a way out. But Julia, she was ready at this moment to hit her sister unbeknownst to her mother. And she only thinks of herself. How it happened? They had a corporate party, and Helen is machine-carrying her daughter. Drunk, I guess. They told me Mom was crossing the road in the wrong place. Jumped out in front of that bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock himself. He's kind of in the hospital now, too. He had a heart attack right there on the spot. Bye-bye. By the time we got there, I got a call late last night, and I called you right away. So Mom's alive. Julia checked. That was the most important thing to her. What hospital is she in? Morozov's. Julia jumped out of the house and called a cab. He seemed to be making good money. But all his property was prudently written down to his new wife, so that his ex-wife and children would have no claim to anything. It looked ugly, petty, even mean. In theory, Julia should have been just as resentful of her father as her mother, just as Helen was. But Julia had a dream. To study economics, start her own business, and one day meet her father on a case. A joint project, a lucrative contract, something like that. Let him see what his daughter had accomplished on her own, without his help. And then maybe they can talk on equal footing. And Julia achieved her goal. She got into the Faculty of Economics, where she was so eager. How happy she was when she saw herself on the list of enrolled. Screamed right in front of the computer monitor, jumped from happiness to the ceiling. She went crazy. Helen came into the room with little Larry in her arms. She had recently become a mother and given birth to a son by a rich man. He paid child support, but he did not want to communicate with his mother and Larry himself. Needless to say, these alimonies were pennies. Standard scheme of gray earnings, most of the income is hidden. Helen was just like her mother, even in an even worse version. But she was not going to give up and continued to dream of a prince, who will surely sooner or later solve all her financial problems. Her mother supported her eldest daughter in everything, adored her grandson. This is not surprising. Julia also gladly fiddled with the baby when she had time. But the girl did not understand how it was possible not to draw conclusions from what had happened. Wasn't it clear? The plan is not too good and often fails. It was time to choose another option. But no, Helen still hung out on dating sites, looking for bigger prey. I got in. Julia explained her strange behavior to her sister. Wow, cool. What, you're going to the city from us now? You're going away to study. Julia and her family also lived in the city, but in a very small, remote from the regional center. Gray 3-story houses, whole streets of old wooden barracks, a huge private sector. Julia's university was located there, and everyone called it that. Her mother, too, was happy to hear about her youngest daughter's enrollment. She had never hoped for such a thing. As it turned out, thought, let the little one, to show off, and when she realizes that nothing worked out, will go in the footsteps of her parents in the supermarket for the cash register. Well, and will think, finally, over the words of more experienced relatives. Realizes it is necessary to look for a rich and reliable man. And here's how it turned out. She did it. Good for you, daughter, Mom hugged Junior. I'll help you in any way I can. I'm sorry, I can't send you a lot of money, but at least a little for food, for housing, for being. Again, you need to dress nicely. In a big city, there's a better chance of meeting a decent man. Mom, you smiled at Julia again. She was touched by the fact that her mother supported and understood her, and even offered to help her. Julia knew. It's not easy for a mother to get that money, but she's willing to help her daughter while she's still a student. And that's priceless. Julia had a new life. She was given a room in the student dormitory, but not a separate one. The room had to be shared with 2 girls, but the roommates turned out to be very nice. They both studied at the Pedagogical Institute. Both, just like Julia herself, were focused on their studies and work. In general, the girls had a lot in common. With one of these neighbors, Valia, Julia even became friends. They kept their relationship even after they graduated from each of their universities and moved to rented apartments. Julia liked her studies. She was convinced in the first year that she had chosen the right direction. She found economics easy, the lectures seemed interesting, and term papers and tests were incredibly easy. Juliet even started earning money. It turned out that people are willing to pay a lot of money for essays and projects. Big it is by Julia's standards, of course. The girl had to work part-time and study a lot. She needs to get there as soon as possible. She has to realize she's with a loved one. At the hospital, Julia was told the terrible news. Mom's gone. She had just recently passed away. At the moment when Julia rushed to the clinic, everything happened in the intensive care unit. The doctor then said that there was no chance of a good outcome. The injuries were too serious, and Julia would not have been able to say goodbye to her mother anyway. She was in a coma, and still the girl fed herself for slowness, for not supporting her mother by the hand, while she was still not. Julia was signing some papers when she received a call from Helen. She had been informed by someone on the nursing staff, and now the older sister was in a state of near panic. It had been a difficult time, arranging the funeral, trying to bring the sister who was supposed to take care of her babies no matter what, and the gradual realization of the terrible fact that the nearest and dearest person in the world was now gone. Just know, that's all. The father did not show up at the funeral, although he could not have been unaware of what had happened. This man did not even call his daughters, did not try to understand whether they need his help. Probably thought they were adults. They were both over 18. So legally, the father was no longer their debtor. He paid child support until his daughters came of age, and there was nothing more to expect. It was then that Julia realized that she would not meet and communicate with this man, even when she reached the heights of her career. He didn't need Lenka and Mama, and they didn't need him either. No resentment. No. It's just that Julia suddenly realized that her father is a complete stranger to her. They may look alike in some ways, but he's a stranger, just a stranger. And that says it all. Helen, on the other hand, is a stranger, and she needs support. Helen cried nonstop for days. Julia didn't stop her. Let her cry. It would make it easier for her. While her sister was dealing with her grief, Julia helped her with her nephews. The little ones made her smile even in such a terrible situation. It was impossible to look indifferently at their funny games, to listen to their cute babbling. Nephews, like nothing else, showed Julia life goes on. Julia could not stay long with her sister. Winter session. Helen had already recovered a bit and even started monitoring dating sites again. Now she wanted even more to have a supportive adult by her side. Her mom was gone. In spite of everything, Julia passed the session with honors. That meant an increased scholarship. But this money would not even be enough to rent a room for a month. The dormitory became paid because it was necessary to eat, dress, and pay for transportation. Julia tried to combine her studies and work in the cafeteria. It turned out to be impossible at once a lot of passes and debts were accumulated. As a result, the girl did not even get admission to the next session. Expulsion loomed ahead. Teachers took into account the previous merits of the girl and went towards her. But she still failed. The only way out was the transfer to the correspondence department. Only here's the catch: budget places were all taken. The commercial option cost a fabulous amount of money for Julia. The rector offered a way out. One day he called Julia to himself and offered her the only, in his opinion, suitable option. "I know your situation. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy." So began the conversation a man who always reminded Julia of Carlson. Just as good-natured, full and short. "Student, you are diligent and promising. Such a one wants to help. That's why I'll close the session for you, no matter what. Let us draw the lines of the movie. And you take a sabbatical for a year. I'll help you get a job for family reasons. Raise money for school. You'll make it. You're a man of determination. And then when you stop, I'll help you with all the details. What do you think?" Julia thought about it. She didn't want to interrupt her studies. On the other hand, what other options did she have? The session is not passed, that's for sure. So, expulsion. And where to go? To go home, to her parents' apartment. So there's already a new suitor living there. a young and kind of nice guy, Stepan. Unlike the previous aluminum suitors, he's not a rich major. The guy works at a construction site, working from dawn to dusk, earning money. Seems to love Helen very much and has taken in all of her children. Maybe they'll actually have a family. Julia is completely unnecessary there right now, and she doesn't want to live with her sister. No, Julia loves her very much. She is the only person in the whole world who can be related to her. But still Julia is used to peace, solitude, freedom. And there's a family with many children. You can't do that there. And after all, she doesn't want to leave Orkovsky. It's a big city. It's beautiful, spacious, interesting. Here there are more prospects for work and study. The urban-type settlement, where Julia spent her childhood, was associated with rage and hopeless longing. No, she didn't want to go back there at all. You know, I'll probably take advantage of your offer. Julia smiled at the rector. What a smart girl, asked the man. You're good, you'll do well. Just don't forget to save for your studies. Be sure to come back to the university in a year. We will be waiting for you. Deal? It's a deal. Thank you very much for the offer. That same night, Julia started looking for a job. She urgently needed money, just to survive, to buy food, to pay for a roof over her head. The most effective motivation of all. It turned out that it was simply unrealistic to find anything close to the desired profession for a girl with an incomplete university degree. Julia was rejected everywhere. Employers did not even consider candidates without a diploma. The girl realized that she could show herself at the interview, but it did not even come to that. After a couple of days of fruitless searches, Julia realized it was time to part with the dream of working as an economist, or rather, to postpone it until better times. In the meantime, it is necessary to find something. When the bar was lowered a bit, things went better. Julia found a lot of vacancies: waitress, cleaner, salesman. But the wages were meager. No, it would be enough to live on, especially if you save money. But Julia had to save up for a year of schooling. With those salaries, it was impossible. And yet Julia needed a job. Immediately, she chose the path of a waitress in a bar in the city center. The arguments for this place were enough. First of all, there was extra pay for night shifts. Secondly, tips were very helpful, sometimes even very generous. And thirdly, the last job gave Julia the opportunity to write term papers and tests to order. And an extra penny in the piggy bank and brains are not idle. Total pluses. Work in the bar Julia even liked. The team is friendly, the bosses are loyal. The audience is decent. It was a rock bar whose owners cared about reputation. The atmosphere here was controlled. Undesirable elements were kicked out of security and never allowed in again. And another and another. Local band musicians and performers and visiting guests gathered here every night. In general, live music. And it was beautiful. Julia listened to the musicians' performances with pleasure, singing along, dancing. This in the bar was only welcomed. Going to work was like going to a holiday. In the bar, Julia finally understood the meaning of this popular phrase. Of course, with a waitress's salary, there are a lot of urgent things to do. Julia, in parallel, was looking for another job, more highly paid. But the girl knew even when she had to quit, she would come here to visit, just to be in this amazingly warm atmosphere. The rock bar and new friends helped Julia through her grief. Of course, the longing for her mother did not go away, but the girl was finally able to come back to life and believe that there are still a lot of good things ahead. It was in a rock bar that Julia met James. One day, the host introduced the guests to a new rock band, which appeared just a couple months ago. James was the bass player. But not only that, he was the one who had the idea to create this band. He was the one who wrote the songs and the music. Modest, always kept in the shadows, but continuously observing all the behavior of the band members, the reaction of the audience. James was the main man in the crew. Although on stage most of the attention was drawn to the lead singer, you could feel it. It was noticeable from the first glance. For some reason, Julia immediately singled him out and reached out to him. She did not recognize herself. Julia realized that she was not in a position to fall in love and have affairs. She was focused on her career, on her studies, on her recovery at the university. She couldn't be distracted by all this. She couldn't be distracted. And yet, James did not study and did not flirt with waitresses, did not talk to anyone first. He was serious, focused on his work. Perhaps that was what bought the girl off. James was very much like herself. James began to appear often in the bar, sometimes with a group to work, sometimes just in the company of buddies to relax. Of course, they soon got to know each other, but he still acted kind of aloof, didn't show open sympathy. Sometimes Julia caught his eye, though. But James would immediately turn away and talk to someone else. And Julia wanted him to pay attention to her, to compliment her, to give her signs of attention, as visitors often do. And then Julia would let him know that she was interested in him. One day in the company of James was a girl. This representative of the beautiful half of humanity came with him before, but they were just friends, girlfriends, other members of the group. This one was clearly something between us and James. They didn't kiss or hug, nothing like that, but sometimes they exchanged tender glances and smiled very warmly at each other. Once she laid her head right on his shoulder, and James, casual, cold, and even stern, stroked her hair in a natural and very gentle gesture, as if she were a kitten. A very unpleasant feeling was beating in Julia's chest from behind the collar. She recognized it immediately, of course. It was jealousy. With surprising scrupulousness, Julia began to pick out her rival's flaws. Too thin, not even pretty either. It's a nose, long hair, a little too liquid. Anyway, how could this madam be as good as Julia? For the first time in her life, Julia seemed to feel smug about her looks. Nature had endowed her, like Helen, with beauty. Julia had heard many compliments from others about her figure. She is tall, slender, long-legged. Her friends generally advised her to try herself in a modeling agency. Only this work was not to Julia's liking. Well, she did not know how to show herself, even somewhere that humiliating it considered it. And here, despite such impressive external data, the rival Julia was such a blue stocking. In general, there was nothing outstanding in James's companion, not even an eye to catch on. Nevertheless, he clearly had very tender feelings for her. Her presence made him happy. Julia watched James carefully and could tell that he loved his companion. It was painful, thanks to the girl that is. So to James, Julia had made up her mind. Decided to do something she had previously considered unacceptable to herself. Her shift was coming to an end, but per usual she stayed late to help a waitress friend serve tables on a Saturday night. There were a lot of patrons. Julia waited for an opportune moment. She even had a little drink beforehand for courage, to feel more confident and relaxed. James stood up and headed for the exit. Someone called him. The music was blaring in the bar. It was impossible to talk on the phone in such an environment. Everyone went outside, to the porch of the bar, or to the smoking room. James chose the street. Julia followed him like a shadow, now or never. The obnoxious girl who had been sitting next to James all evening stayed at the table. She chatted merrily with his buddies. You could see that they had all known each other for a long time. Probably a long and serious relationship. And yet still Julia will try otherwise. Otherwise, she'll regret later that she didn't even try. James stepped out onto the porch. He paced the square in front of the bar, patiently explaining something to someone. Julia watched him through the large window on the door. James was not smiling, not joking. Did he see the conversation was serious or unpleasant? It didn't matter. Julia would still approach him as soon as she did. James pressed reset and was about to go back to the bar, but Julia came out to meet him. Luckily, they were alone on the porch at that moment. Hi, Julia smiled at him. James looked at her with interest. We've said hello, and I think we already have. Julia nodded at me. I need to talk to you. James immediately stopped, tuned into the conversation. All his appearance showed that he was ready to listen to his interlocutor. He could have brushed her off or shown irritation or displeasure. But James looked at her with his dark and intelligent eyes and waited. I like you, and I've liked you for a long time. Julia decided to get right to the point. I don't know how to explain it. I'm magnetically attracted to you. It's never happened to me before. Aya, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this. Julia lowered her eyes. There, she'd said it. What's next? James was probably just now finding the words to stitch her down as politely as possible. He probably was. Julia suddenly felt unbearably ashamed of her action. Why had she reached out to him? How could she look him in the eye after all this? James comes to the bar a lot. And then Julia felt his hands on her shoulders. A gentle touch, as if she were some incredibly fragile vessel. Julia, the name itself, as it escaped James's lips, sounded like beautiful music to the girl. Julia, I couldn't even imagine such a thing. James looked at her and smiled. He so rarely smiled. His eyes. The girl could see it clearly. They shone with happiness. Sincere, genuine. What's going on? Is he happy for her confession? Instead of words, James kissed Julia. The girl felt dizzy from it all. He was hugging her. More precisely, even held, because the girl's legs were literally under the painting kissed. Then he stroked her back and head, gently pressed her against him. I've been watching you for a long time too, and I'm attracted to you in the same way. Then why? I didn't even notice it once. I thought you didn't care. I didn't want to embarrass you. I don't. Anyway, I'm older. Older for you. I thought you were attracted to other guys, brutal, successful. With your looks, anything's possible. You're beautiful. You're unreal. You even inspired my song. Didn't realize I'm an Olympic princess. Is that about you? No, Julia confessed. It's a very beautiful song. I love it. I didn't even realize it came from you. Oh yeah, that's right. And that girl who came with you. Are you two together? We are. James couldn't help but chuckle. Together. Ever since my parents brought me back from the hospital with a pink bow and told me that Svetka was my sister. So she's your sister. Julia laughed out loud. I thought so. That's why I decided to have this conversation today. Sister, sister. James held Julia tighter to him and breathed in the scent of her hair, just passing through town. She's been married a long time, living far away with her husband. She misses the brotherhood of her troublemaking brother. Julia and James started dating. Turns out he's been sympathizing with the pretty waitress all this time. Why didn't he make any moves on her? I was going to. But later, when he's a little more cash flush. He had a clear attitude in his head. Girl, I'm interested in losers. So far, there was too much to do with the band, organizing performances, and so on. But the guys were already starting to earn money from their songs. The prospects were looking good. And oddly enough for a rock musician, was James shy around girls? No, he had a lot of friends with whom you can chat, laugh together. But Julia, she evoked in him a very special feeling, and that made James, used to performing in front of hundreds of people, cringe. But Julia made the first step, thus shattering all of James' doubts. And now they're together. James himself suggested moving in together. They decided to choose Julia's apartment. Convenient location, adequate cost, cozy room. So it was James who moved in with her. But he immediately took upon himself the payment of rent and minor repairs, which every dwelling needs from time to time. And it also turned out that James is an excellent cook. Julia's culinary talents just pales in front of his skill. James, as befits a creative person, created real masterpieces. Whether in the recording studio or in the kitchen, he was gentle, sensitive, and attentive, fully immersed in his work, but not forgetting about his beloved. They talked a lot, often went for walks. Sometimes they discussed the next song together. It happened that Julia would suggest to her beloved the necessary phrase or words. He happily grasped the idea, and then the girl felt proud of herself. Well, how? Participated in the creation of a hit? Julia completely dissolved in her feelings and new sensations. Before meeting James, she did not know what it is love for a man. She had no time for that. First studying hard, then trying to survive. It turned out to be so pleasant to be near a man who embraces you, interested in your mood and well-being, looks at you with admiring eyes, as at some princess, and melt from the touch of warm, strong hands. Knowing that he, this tall man with black eyes, would do anything for you, Helen didn't approve of her sister's choice. As always, she had her own yardstick. He's poor, he doesn't even have his own apartment. Again, no steady job, no business. He's a musician, he's got his own rock band. So what? Who needs them anyway? There's a lot of these one-day bands out there. We don't know if they'll succeed. I think you got the wrong guy. With your looks, you shouldn't do that. It's okay with me. I have 3 kids. Who needs me? So I'm content with what fate gives me. I don't complain. But you? Julia didn't expect her sister to understand. They were always too different. But Julia didn't need understanding. She was happy, she was loved. She had someone close to her. Yeah, he was going through a rough patch. But James tried, went to his goal, worked hard, looked for the right contacts, planned something. Julia supported him in all his endeavors, and he appreciated her devotion. Many times he said that he was grateful to fate for such a gift, for her. One day James undertook a rather risky endeavor, inviting a famous rock band to Orkovsky. It was planned that his band would perform as a warm-up act for the famous musicians. This event was to increase the popularity of the band James. Well, and in general, the organization of such concerts is a way to earn good money. But something went wrong. Not as many people came to the concert as planned. There was a big rock festival in a neighboring state. James didn't take that into account. Or rather, he found out about the festival too late, when everything was already in full swing. In general, James went into a big disadvantage payment of musicians' fees, rent of the hall and equipment, tickets for the rock band, promotional activities. All this was paid off only half of the money from ticket sales. The concert itself was great, but James had huge debts that had to be closed as soon as possible. But with what? It was hard for Julia to look at her lover. During this period, he looked confused, anxious. I wanted to help him at least something. But how? Where did Julia get the money from? James took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. His friends helped him, the situation improved, but the debt was still quite substantial. And then Julia offered to help. She had savings, money she was saving for her studies. Not much, of course, but still. In addition, the girl did what she had been against for a long time. She took out a consumer loan. These funds were quite enough to close the debt. From where? Surprised James when Julia handed him several packs of new crispy bills. Well, just out of the blue, my debt was paid off, plus the insurance. Finally paid off the cell phone case money. The girl lied. She knew. If she told James the truth, he'd never take her money. And so it wasn't like it was the last one that came in by accident. Thank you. James hugged Julia tightly. I'll pay you back. You'll see we'll be famous soon, and I'll pay it all back. James paid the debt and continued to develop the band. Julia slowly paid off the loan. It was no longer possible to save for school, and in general, the salary suddenly became much smaller. The bar had fallen on hard times. It was good that James bought groceries and paid the rent. That is, he took the main part of the expenses on himself. James' income came from a few corporate gigs and the occasional part-time job. Unstable earnings, but still does not dry up, and the stream is empty and then thick. Julia, not caring about the financial side of their relationship. She enjoyed James' attention, bathed in his love and care, and generously gave him tenderness, love, support. Julia tried not to think about the future. But not to recover in the university this year will do it next year. Nothing to worry about. She still had time. The most important thing is that he, James, is there for her. Julia didn't know she was capable of such feelings. And then James disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Julia. Nothing bad happened to him. It started out as a business trip. You can imagine, James grabbed Julia by the shoulder and even shook her a little. His eyes burned like 2 bright spotlights. You can imagine, I was invited to Germany to write music for a band. They found me on the internet, and they liked it. And now I'm invited. Julia couldn't believe her ears. She knew the band James was talking about. They were very popular musicians, touring all over the world. And they'd noticed James. They're offering him a partnership. Unbelievable. I'm going to have to go away for a while, James continued. Do you realize what that means? Julia nodded. She understood the money, the fame, the dizzying opportunities for James to grow and develop as a musician. Useful acquaintances and connections. James would get things he'd never dreamed of, but it looks like they're going to have to part ways indefinitely. After all, James clearly said, "I have to leave me, not us." The packing started. James had a lot of things to sort out. First of all, finding a replacement. Someone has to play in his band in his place. Temporarily, while he was away, of course. Secondly, James had to apply for a passport and visa. Thirdly, packing. In all the hustle and bustle, he seemed to have forgotten all about Julia. James was too enthusiastic about the upcoming changes and prospects. The girl looked at him and realized he would forget about her. Forget about her. In another country, muted by new impressions, excited by work and success. Perhaps James would even find someone there. But James, he hugged her so tenderly in the evenings, so sincerely assured her that he would miss her. Time will pass quickly, and then there's the video link. We'll be in constant contact with each other. At least I'll make some money, finally pay you back in a decent way. I know how much you need that money. Maybe we can even buy an apartment. My band will get bigger. I'll gain invaluable experience. I'll know how to do things. Everything's gonna be fine. James truly believed that. Julia saw it. He wasn't lying, he wasn't bullshitting. But something told the girl that everything would change as soon as her beloved was abroad. It's just that James himself doesn't realize it yet. That's how it turned out in the end. At first, James called every day, as promised, telling her how to settle in at the new place. Everything thrilled him, the experience overwhelmed him. And then he suddenly dropped off the radar. He just disappeared. He didn't call or answer Julia's calls. Long rings steadily ended with the message that the subscriber, apparently busy and therefore cannot answer. Julia was alarmed at first. I thought that something had happened to him, something terrible, irreparable. But soon she saw a fresh performance of that band on the music channel. James was with them. He was very different, mature, and even more serious than usual. I mean, there was nothing wrong with him. It's just that he'd apparently decided to start a new life and cut off all his old ties, including forgetting about her. And Julia? At first, the girl still hoped, waited for him to call, to explain everything. But James disappeared completely out of her life. Julia made it a habit to watch the music channel every day. Every once in a while, she'd see James. He was never the center of attention, but he still got in the camera lens sometimes. And quite often the girl next to him was the same girl, either a makeup artist or the band's costumer. Beautiful, bright. Apparently, there was something between her and James. Julia was desperately jealous of James, both of this girl and of her lover's other potential husbands. She was hurt like she had never been hurt before, and also hurt and scared. Scared of being alone again without the support and warmth of a loved one. An unpleasant mixture of feelings and emotions. And there were other problems, more pressing. Moneylessness. Julia could barely make ends meet. She had a tiny salary and a loan. Eventually, the bar went bankrupt. The new owners bought it and set up Julia's Coca Lounge. She had to quit, like all the other employees. Another blow. Julia had special memories and feelings connected with this place. And now there was no cozy bar where you could always enjoy live music, where there was a friendly, warm atmosphere. James would understand, support her. Everything was easier and more pleasant with him in general. But he was hundreds of kilometers away from her and seemed to have forgotten all about her. James had no idea how desperate she was. He never found out about the loan. He thought Julia had helped him with the extra money she'd suddenly received. And of course, he has no idea she's been fired. And if he did, what would he care about her now? Julia had no time to go over the offenses and think about how it would be if she desperately needed a job, and preferably in a decently paid. And so the girl tirelessly scored the ads. Wanted to find something that would help to get out of the financial hole. Well, at least the landlord agreed to wait with payment. But he's got a lot of patience too. Julia will be asked to leave. This ad caught Julia's attention with the amount of money that was offered for the services. Not a bad figure. It could solve many of the girl's problems. But the job itself seemed too unfamiliar to Julia. A nurse was needed for a little girl. The sort of unhealthy diagnosis didn't agree, but the person who gave the ad made it clear the child needed round-the-clock supervision and care, including taking medication by the hour, accompanying her to procedures, and so on. Julia wondered. She had experience in caring for babies. Thanks, Helen, her conclusion. The girl even enjoyed fiddling with her nephews. She knew how to get along with small children, knew how to feed them, change their clothes, keep them occupied. But here we were talking about a sick child, a seriously ill one by the looks of it. Could she do it? At least it was worth a try. Julia called the given number. She was answered by a pleasant male voice. The man asked her several questions: age, occupation, education, experience with small children, and she was invited for an interview. Julia was nervous the day before. She wanted the job. Julia needed it like air. It was a chance to get out of a financial hole, to stay afloat. Where else to find such a salary? That's why the girl was worried about what if she was not taken. What then again to look for a place waitress? Labor for pennies. Cab brought Julia to the country cottage village. Elite neighborhood, high, beautiful houses surrounded by fences. At the gate, the girl met a woman, an au pair. As Julia found out later, and in fact a person who had everything on her plate: cleaning, cooking, laundry. Because her employer, William, was always too busy. Businessmen in general have very little free time. William met the job applicants in the living room. He was a man in his 40s with intelligent, piercing blue eyes, perfectly styled hair with a slight square, an athletic figure. Yes, this man clearly paid attention to health and appearance. Juliet even cracked up at first. How to start a conversation with someone like this? To herself, next to him, she suddenly seemed insignificant. Good morning. Warm. William smiled, and Julia's embarrassment vanished. The man's smile was open, and the kind William seemed at once like a man of his own. Hello. Julia smiled back. I'm here through an ad for you. It's very good. I'll tell you right away. I need a nurse for my daughter Sophia. She is in a very serious condition now, so it's not for everyone. She's being monitored by the paramedics. They're here every day. I could hire a nurse for Sophia, but how can I tell you? There's already a lot of pain in her life, a lot of people in white coats. I wish there was someone else there for her. You know, a young girl like you, cheerful, who knows a lot of songs and fairy tales, who can cheer up a child, inspire him, come up with some interesting activity, in general, to brighten up her leisure time. Why? What's wrong with your girl? Julia just couldn't help but ask that question. Who would know? William lowered his eyes. His face grew darker in an instant, becoming anxious and tense. Sophia, it's been examined everywhere. No one could understand anything. It's like her body is destroying itself. No signs of autoimmune aggression. She's been getting tests all the time. They do, but she's fading and nothing helps her. Poor baby, Julia exclaimed. The doctors are doing what they can. I have the means, as you can see, but they are not all powerful, unfortunately. Anyway, Sophia needs more than just a nanny. We have Adriana, our favorite au pair. She will feed her, give her medications on time, and we don't just need a caregiver either. Sophia is supervised by nurses. They do all the necessary procedures. Sophia is needed soon. A friend, a person who can bring her positive emotions. The doctors say it's very important in her condition. And looking at you, it seems to me that you're young, beautiful, cheerful, and you have a kind look in your eye. You can empathize. That's good. Julia nodded. She wanted to see Sophia as soon as possible. If she needed positive emotions, she would provide them. Julia was sure to cheer up a girl who had such a serious illness. To brighten up the gray, everyday life of the little patient, we'll find a way to make her life more pleasant. If you're ready to get to work right now, William continued, let's start a trial period. Let's say 3 days, and then Sophia will decide. Of course, you will be paid for your time anyway. But do you agree? Yes, nodded Julia. Good, William asked. Then Adriana will introduce you to Sophia. And I'm off. Business. As the door shut behind William, Adriana, a middle-aged woman with a surprisingly soft and cozy look, turned to Julia with a question. I used to talk to babies. Do you know what little kids are like? I have nephews, Julia nodded. Is that a good thing? Adriana shook her head. But Sophia is ours. She's an unusual child. I've already realized that. I guess Sophia hardly ever gets out of bed. She gets tired quickly. It's hard to get her interested in anything, but you have to. Sophia needs to be distracted from her pain, from her agony. And she needs to walk at least an hour a day. That's what the doctors said. I get it. Well, now let's go meet her. Julia followed Adriana up to the second floor and entered the nursery. It was a spacious princess room. A huge window let in a lot of daylight. Along the walls were racks of expensive toys and books. Right in the center of the room was a mini playground. There was a slide, swings, and even a trampoline. A little farther away was a ball pool, and closer to the door was a bed. What kind of bed was it? A big, round one. Julia looked around curiously. She had never seen a room like this before. Was it all for one child? In the midst of this splendor, Julia did not immediately notice the little mistress of the room. The girl was lying in bed, surrounded by large stuffed toys. There was a cat baton, a fluffy white bear, a bright green crocodile with flowers all over his body, and a skinny, pale 7-year-old girl, completely transparent and almost merged from the unhealthy color of her skin with the white bed linen. Huge blue eyes, like her father's, looked at the entrance with curiosity. Sophia raised herself up on her elbows, though it cost her great effort, and turned to Adriana. Who's that with you? The new rehabilitator. The difficult word came out of the little girl's mouth easily and habitually, and it felt unnatural. No, Bunny, this is your new friend. Her name is Julia. Will you play dolls together? Sophia got a little excited. Would you like to? I smiled at Julia. The girl evoked sympathy and pity. I like to play dolls very much. That's good. Adriana's not available. Can't Daddy play at all? Adults have a lot to do. Julia shrugged. That's why they can be boring sometimes, Sophia suggested. And the conspirators smiled. Boring, agreed Julia. Sophia laughed quietly. Well, I can see you're going to be fine. Adriana looked genuinely happy. Did you have fun here? I'm going to make dinner. Oh, and Sophia, you remember the nurse is coming to see you today, right? I remember, the girl frowned. Again, IVs. But where to go? Sweet Adriana kissed the top of the girl's head and left the room. Julia was left alone with Sophia. Well, shall we play? The girl turned to her ward with a smile. You have so many beautiful toys here. I can't keep my eyes open. You'd better read to me, the girl asked. It seemed that the short conversation had taken the last of her strength. Sophia sank down on the pillows, pulled the blanket over her skinny body, although the room was warm. Good, Julia agreed. She was surprised and horrified by the weakness of this child of 7. They are also Azers, such as Larry, Julia's older nephew. He is just the same age as Sophia. But he can't even sit still for 5 minutes. He's always getting into things, figuring things out. If the boy was suddenly in this room, he would immediately start jumping on the trampoline or going down the slide. Helen calls him the perpetual motion machine and Molly. Christina are not lagging behind her brother, although they are younger. Sophia is lying there, poor thing. What do you want to read about princesses? There's a book on the windowsill. Vera started to read it to me, but she doesn't have time to read it. It was a heavy, beautiful book with bright pictures. But the story itself, it seemed Julia some kind of silly, boring, predictable, and formulaic. She herself, as a child, did not like such stories at all. And let's make up our own story about these princesses. As Julia, I expected tired eyes, Sophia flashed interest. How to do it, she clarified. Very simple. I start, you continue. Sophia was engrossed in the lesson. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. She would ride in her racing car. Then the heroine would be kidnapped by a dragon and then rescued by the prince. The girl's imagination was running wild, which seemed to surprise Sophia herself. Then Adriana entered the room. Seeing that Julia and Sophia were getting along, she was pleased. The woman brought a lunch of mashed soup and stewed vegetables. Sophia grumbled. I don't want it, she said. I don't want to eat at all. I don't want any of this. Adriana looked at Julia. The woman was clearly waiting for her help. Let me feed you. Julia turned to Sophia. Each spoonful. Another princess adventure. I'll make them up as I go along. Can you imagine the stories I'll have to tell you? What do you think will finish your food or my fantasy first? It worked. The food ended faster than Julia's fantasy, but Sophia demanded more story. Adriana splayed out her hands in surprise, smiled, and walked out. Soon a nurse, Sophia, entered the nursery. Immediately on the gloomy one. She was almost asleep by now. Lunch and the story had tired her out. But it was time for treatments. IVs. Hopelessly asked the girl to the nurse. She nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt. You sleep later and we'll have tea. Adriana pulled Julia by the sleeve. Aren't you needed here now? The au pair led Julia into the spacious kitchen, smoking cups of coffee and a flavorful cake that looked like it had just come out of the oven were waiting on the table. You, Sophia, and I see you're getting along. The woman smiled, looking warmly at Julia. That's good. Sophia had kicked out the previous nanny, but he's taken to you right away. I've already called William and told him all about it. He's very pleased and excited. He told me to take good care of you. I'm glad too. Julia smiled. Sophia is just a pity. My nephews are so noisy, so cheerful. She is lying on the bed. She can't even play. She has nothing to play with. It's scary. That's what the doctors say. There's a chance. No prognosis. Adriana shook her head. They can't even diagnose anything. They just treat the symptoms, that's all. Sophia will be better now after the drip. Take her for a walk after her afternoon nap for a while. William, the girl's father. I get that. Where's her mom? On a business trip. She has a demanding job too, that's why she can't babysit. I wish, Adriana sighed. Is Betty ours? She's gone. It was a difficult labor. The doctors tried to save the baby and didn't notice that the mother needed help. And she herself, Helen, didn't complain to them about anything. She was worried about the baby. But that's how it turned out. The day after the birth, Betty had a high fever. Checkup, ICU, this and that. Her heart stopped. Poor thing had some kind of internal bleeding. It's a rare case. And then there was Sophia in the NICU. She was born prematurely. It was a tough time. That's a shame. That's a shame, Adriana agreed. Let me tell you the whole story. Looks like you're gonna be here for a while. So you should know. William grew up in a well-to-do, close-knit family. A loving mom and dad, caring, attentive grandparents, a room of his own. Trips to the seaside every summer, birthdays, friends. William had a happy childhood, an equally happy youth. He graduated from high school with a gold medal. Thanks in large part to parents who cared about their son's education. If they saw gaps, they immediately hired William the best tutors. And foreign languages, and the boy studied in foreign camps and rest, and education at once. Vouchers to such places were not cheap, and it was not easy to get them. But what can't you do for the sake of your favorite son, especially if he is so desirable and long-awaited? William had rather old parents. They did not get a child for many years. The couple resigned, was with such a fate. But then, when there was no hope left, life suddenly threw a surprise gave the couple an heir. Needless to say, all of his mother's and father's attention from then on belonged undividedly to William. William was never shy of his parents. Yes, he saw his mother and father much older than the relatives of his classmates. But the boy, on the contrary, was proud of them, because William's father was a well-known businessman in the city, and his mother was the head doctor of the regional hospital. Everyone knew them, everyone respected them. It never occurred to William to be ashamed of his family. William grew up. His parents were rapidly becoming obsolete, giving up. When the guy was in his third year of university, his father died. Stroke, intensive care, coma, and all. William then, for the first time, felt like an adult. You bet, because he, a student, had to get into the affairs of the company, which his parents left the guy by inheritance. It was William, a teenager, who was interested in his father's business. He knew a lot, even had the right to sign. And yet still, at first, he entrusted most of the processes to the manager of the board, a longtime friend of his departed parent. Because William needed to study and support his mother, who had given up a lot after the death of her spouse. 3 years passed. William had just gotten his degree, just taken over his father's company, just starting to gain momentum. And then there's another blow. Mom this time. The kid was all alone. William felt miserable and lonely in his parents' big house. At least Adriana, the au pair and almost a member of the family, was there. She had known William as a baby and treated him as her son. The woman had no children of her own. She gave all her care to the young man, who had lost both his parents one after the other. It was hard on him. Adriana shook her head. Just a boy, but also. Work had pulled him through then. He had to decide something, to go somewhere, to hold meetings, to make contracts, and so on. That's what saved him back then. Time passed. William went from a young, inexperienced guy to a smart guy. A grip on the man, a talented businessman. Adriana rejoiced, looking at her ward. He grew older, stronger, more confident. The au pair wanted William to find a good wife, marry her, and become a father. Then her heart would be at peace. Adriana was calm. Only he had no one in particular. Adriana said, "No, there were some girls hanging around William. He's a good-looking guy, wealthy. They're always on the prowl. But I met with one of them, and I didn't see anything wrong with the other. I didn't like them as counselors. And I didn't like them either. It seemed like they only wanted money from him. He's got a tail on his head." And then Betty showed up. William met Betty literally on the street. She was walking down the sidewalk in a hurry. Turns out she was going to a job interview at William's firm. Betty had recently been downsized. The factory where she had worked for several years, after the institute as an accountant, had suddenly closed. So Betty was looking for a new position, and William went out for a walk to clear his head. He even had a goal to buy donuts at the bakery around the corner. And that's when fate knocked the young people head-on, literally. Helen jumped out of the corner too quickly and ran into the unsuspecting William. It was like something out of a romantic music video. The bag slipped off Betty's shoulder and the contents scattered on the pavement. William and Betty rushed to pick it up. Did the girl harbor words of apology? William assured her it was okay and admired the girl's beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young people sorted out the bag and the things that had spilled out of it, they rose synchronously and smiled at each other. Well, William, as a man, made the first step, learned the name of the beautiful stranger, and then introduced himself. They walked leisurely and talked and got acquainted. When William found out that Betty was rushing to his office, he asked and immediately realized that this beautiful girl was his destiny. And it was not by chance that they met in such an interesting way. Rather than seeing each other for the first time in the office, it was more romantic, more interesting, more enjoyable. All in all, a real romance was brewing. Adriana had never seen William so happy. Betty turned out to be intelligent, understanding, kind. She and Adriana, and importantly, quickly found a common language. Sweet, sweet girl. And for what? And only such a fate. Sadly shook her head Adriana. A couple of years after their acquaintance, William and Betty got married. It was a wonderful couple, harmonious, happy. There was love, mutual understanding, and respect between the couple. I am sure that her heart rejoiced when she saw them together, her beloved. After all, Vanya, his wonderful, beautiful wife. Here with children, both decided not to hurry. Adriana continued the story. It was their common decision, as if they felt something. They traveled, worked, met with friends. And I, the fool, all in the old man's way. I advised them not to wait too long. I wanted to nurse their baby. But William and Betty lived on their own for 5 years after they were married. Were they happy together? No, they wanted kids, but not right away later while they were happy with everything. And then the news of Betty's pregnancy. It was an unplanned event, but the whole household welcomed it with joy. Well, then it was time, Betty summarized. The baby had decided he'd had enough of waiting. Thank God. Adriana threw up her hands. I think you're having a boy. You're very beautiful, Betty. Girls take away their mother's beauty during pregnancy. But the au pair was wrong. The ultrasound confirmed that Betty was expecting a girl. A big, strong one. They showed me a picture of her. They take pictures of a baby in the womb now. And when I looked at it, it looked just like Betty. That's how our Sophia was born, just like her mommy. Sophia. It was Betty who chose the name for her daughter. William and Adriana didn't mind. They both liked it very much. The pregnancy didn't go too easily. At first, Betty was suffering from toxicosis. Then it seemed to subside, but it was replaced by other problems such as high blood pressure and swelling. The child was developing well, but the mother was suffering, melting before her eyes, refusing to eat, lying down a lot. The usually energetic Betty lacked the strength even to go downstairs. Adriana carried her food directly to her bedroom. The woman felt sorry for Betty, helped her in any way she could, and assured her that everything would go away after her daughter was born. Children aren't easy for women, Adriana sighed. Pregnancy had taken its toll on Betty. Who's to say? Julia shrugged, remembering her sister. Both of them had gotten babies relatively easily. Anyway, Betty went into labor much earlier than she should have. The whole pregnancy was threatened, so fortunately, the mother-to-be was in the hospital under the supervision of doctors at that moment. They tried to stop the process, but failed. Sophia was born prematurely. Weak, she did not scream. She was not placed on Alina's chest, not even shown to her. When it comes to newborns who need to stay in the womb for at least 3 more months, things are different. Sophia was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. The fight for her life began, and Betty and Lena seemed to be fine at first. Well, tired, of course, after childbirth. Well, anxious. She couldn't find a place for her daughter. It's all understandable, all explainable, and natural. The doctors examined the woman in labor, found no abnormalities, and sent her to the ward. Afterwards, serious symptoms appeared, but it was too late. William and I were all worried about the girl. Adriana almost cried. It was obvious that even now, 7 years later, it was hard for her to remember it all. They thought that the little girl would not survive. She was born too early. She was very weak. And then, when William received a call from the hospital in the morning and was told that his wife had died of internal bleeding, he could not believe his ears. It seemed to him that it was Sophia. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. But no, Sophia had made it. Stronger was the girl. Betty, on the other hand, was not. William, then the gray one, walked around, didn't sleep or eat for months. I thought he was going to die too, but he went away. I had to work. I had to pull Sotnikova through. To be perfectly honest, he didn't treat his daughter well at first. Blamed her for what happened to Lena. He knew it was wrong. But he couldn't help it. He was angry with her, that's all. Sophia was discharged home. They hired a nanny for her. Someone had to look after the baby. Adriana was too old for that, but she enjoyed playing. Sophia took her around the yard in her stroller and talked to her a lot. And she was the only one who gave the newborn the love she needed. My father was not capable of that at that time. She is like a granddaughter to me, smiled the au pair. I accepted her immediately. But William, he long shunned the child, bought for her everything necessary, and sometimes went for a walk with her. And that was if I made him. He didn't take the initiative himself. And then one day Sophia got sick. The temperature was high. Nothing helped. She was throwing up. It was the flu. It plagued a lot of people back then. And the little ones took it especially hard. But anyway, Sophia went to the hospital again. The doctors didn't give any prognosis. And that's when William came to his senses, gave up everything. He sat by his daughter's bedside singing songs and singing, telling poems, rocking her in his arms, and Sophia. It was as if she felt her father's care. She was on the mend immediately. Our little girl was discharged, and William became a real father, loving and caring. Life went on as usual. William worked a lot, but always found time to spend with his daughter. Sophia grew up, pleased her father and Adriana with her excellent health and rare intelligence. And everything seemed to be fine. But Adriana was worried that William was all alone. It seemed to her that there would be no happiness for him until he met a woman. Only now it was a very difficult task. Chosen by William, she had to love and accept Sophia. Otherwise, a union was out of the question. Well, God heard my prayers, Adriana smiled. And William had Lucy, the beautiful Lucy. I can't take my eyes off her. She's smart too. She's got a baby herself, a little girl a little younger than Sophia. It's a great family. Lucy got a job with William, and it all started at a corporate party. So it's the usual story. Lucy was very good to Sophia. She often took her and her youngest daughter somewhere to an amusement park or to the movies. Sophia loved both Lucy and her little half-sister Nancy. She was truly happy. William and Lucy got married and started living together. Then Sophia started having these symptoms. First dizziness, then nausea, weakness, lack of appetite. Examination in the best clinics, trips to doctors abroad, consultations with famous professors, all this did not give any result. Doctors could not diagnose the girl was melting before their eyes. The first year, she was still on her feet. Adriana almost cried again. It was obvious that her heart was truly hurting for the little girl. After New Year's Eve, she had gotten very ill, and now she was so afraid for her. And it is not clear what kind of illness attacked our little girl. Lucy and her daughter temporarily moved into her own apartment. Just Nancy went to the garden to carry infections from there, and for Sophia, all this was extremely dangerous. So Lucy and William made that decision. And it comes from Lucy a lot, every day almost. She's good, Sophia is fair. They bring her goodies. They bring Nancy too, sometimes, when she's not sick. When she started kindergarten, it started. Sick day after sick day. So they have a wife with one child separately, and a husband with their eldest daughter separately. That's the family. Well, what can I do? That's the situation. It's a strange situation, Julia said. She was shocked by the story of William and Sophia. You could make a TV series. Well, that's just the way it is. The old woman waved her hands. Sophia, I can see that you get along, and that's good. Everything will be more pleasant with you. The days went by. Julia now lived in the room next to Sophia's nursery, but the girl often asked the nanny to stay overnight in her bedroom. Sophia had a very comfortable sofa there. Julia lay down on it. They talked before going to bed, holding hands. Julia saw Sophia. It was very important. The girl clearly lacked attention, even though there were many adults around her. William was a very caring and anxious father and a pleasant person to be around. They often had conversations about Sophia. The man always listened attentively to Julia, did not interrupt or argue, and asked the right questions. Julia also got to know Lucy. Adriana was right. Indeed, she was a very beautiful woman. Chiseled cheekbones, beautifully curved lips, the grace of a panther, a real queen. But when Lucy interacted with Sophia, when she was adjusting the blanket on the girl, she smiled and stroked the little girl's head. Julia couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was faking it. It was evident in seemingly insignificant details. The cold glint of her eyes, the squeamish movement of her lips, something elusive and very unpleasant. One day Julia had a strange dream. The girl found herself in some room stripped wallpaper, creaking, twigs, floors. She sat on a stool by a dark window through which nothing was visible and realized that she was asleep. She wanted to wake up, but for some reason she couldn't. And then Julia did not even realize where she had come from. Betty appeared in front of her as if out of thin air. Julia recognized her because she had seen Sophia's mother in pictures. Betty smiled sadly and looked at Julia with a warm and very soft gaze. "Watch her," she said in a quiet, illogical voice. "Watch out for Lucy. She's trouble. She's dangerous." Betty vanished into thin air, and Julia had so many questions she wanted to ask her. How to keep an eye on her on what? What is she dangerous? Julia woke up in a cold sweat. Or rather, as if she'd flown into her body, fallen into it. It felt strange. Betty's words were still echoing in her head. No, Julia didn't believe in the supernatural. But the dream, which was little more than a dream, was more like a journey through time and worlds. The strange dream wouldn't let go. The next day, Lucy was gone, and Julia waited for her. She knew for a fact that this woman was involved in something bad. Lucy is somehow hurting this family and doesn't like Sophia. She doesn't sympathize with the girl. She just pretends to care. And how come the others don't notice this? Even the experienced, long-lived Adriana. Lucy showed up the next day, beautiful as always, brightly made up, languid. First thing she did was go up to Sophia to say hello. Then she went down to the kitchen. "Sophia is thirsty," Lucy said, looking at Adriana. "Let me make her some cocoa. Come on," I fussed, the au pair. "No, I can manage. I feel like it. I want to do something for her." "You're so thoughtful." Julia was silent. She was watching Lucy like Betty had asked her to in the dream. For some reason, it felt like this was the big moment. It was as if Betty was there, telling her to be vigilant. Adriana was tending to the dough. Julia pretended to look out the window. But she was watching Lucy. And then there was Tanya. The woman deftly pulled a small vial out of her sleeve, dripped a few drops from there into the milk, and immediately hid the bottle back. Only a couple seconds, a few deft movements, but Julia saw everything. "The drink for the princess is ready." Lucy smiled. "Julia, give me her favorite cup, please." Julia obeyed. She silently watched as Lucy poured what felt like a mug's Sophia glasses, with the image of characters of the girl's favorite cartoon. And I realized Sophia shouldn't drink it. She shouldn't. She must act. Julia pretended to slip. She bumped into Lucy, who dropped the cup from her hands. The glass fell and shattered. What spilled out onto the floor? "I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy." Julia fussed, grabbed a rag, started wiping, undoing the puddle, picking up the shards. "It's okay, I'll do more." In the voice of Lucy sounded poorly concealed irritation. Julia could not do it a second time. It would arouse suspicion. So she had to accept the fact that Sophia would get the cocoa from her stepmother's hands. While Lucy and Adriana were at Sophia's place, Julia squeezed the rag she used to wipe the cocoa into an empty tomato paste jar. She was going to take the liquid to be analyzed today. I needed to know exactly what Lucy put in the cocoa. Maybe it was just vitamins. Then there was no point in panicking. But something told the girl it wasn't. She had to wait 2 days for the test results. When Julia saw the statement, she was horrified. The drink contained a deadly poison, causing symptoms similar to those of Sophia. So the girl's weakness was due to her stepmother systematically poisoning her. Just like in a fairy tale, Julia didn't know who to turn to with her news. Adriana, what can she do? William, he wouldn't believe her. What to do? Lucy can't be allowed near the girl anymore. She wants to send her to the grave, and she's almost succeeded. And yet Julia has the courage to talk to William. She told him everything about her terrible dream, about the cocoa, and about the examination. Julia was afraid that he would yell at her, call her out, kick her out, or what's more, accuse her of wanting to hurt his daughter. "You know," William said, looking at Julia, "I would. I'd probably fire you immediately after saying that. It's very strange, you have to admit. But just yesterday, I had an unusual dream too. Betty, she asked me to trust you just to trust you, nothing more. Why don't you just keep this to yourself and take a vacation? I need to sort this out. Adriana will call you when you can go back to work." Julia spent those few days on pins and needles. She didn't know what was going on at William's house, and she was worried about Sophia, who had already become attached to her. But William had said to wait for the call, so she would wait. Adriana called Julia when she saw her name on the screen. Worried about what she would be told, how did it go? "Come on over." All Adriana could do was extort. "We're in the middle of something. Come over soon. Sophia misses you. Very much." Julia didn't have to beg long. Half an hour later, she was already at William's house. The owner himself opened the door, still as calm and unruffled as ever. His appearance made it hard to guess what had happened. "I want to thank you." The man finally allowed himself to smile. "You were right, Lucy. She really wanted to. I'm afraid to say it out loud. Sophia wanted to poison that bastard. Adriana didn't bother. That's a lot to think about. I already trusted her. The story turned out to be banal and old as the world stick. Lucy was not going to put up with a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's favorite daughter. She wanted her own daughter Nancy to be the sole heir to William's entire fortune. Well, first she herself, of course. Lucy had once studied to be a pharmacist. However, she never worked a day in her profession, preferring to live off rich admirers. Nature generously gave her beauty, so that the opportunities for such an existence the woman had. Received in college knowledge was enough to think of a way to send the hated stepdaughter to the other world. A poison that is difficult to detect in blood, tissue unless specifically looked for. Lucy poured the toxic substance into the food she cooked for Sophia. And the girl weakened, slowly fading away. There was nothing left to do. It doesn't make sense. Unbelievable. Everything Adriana couldn't calm down. Julia understood her. Indeed, Lucy's act was monstrous. How could she do that to a defenseless child? Sophia trusted her, loved her. So William installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen. It turned out that Lucy was putting poison in Sophia's food every time. Sometimes she cooked something for the girl herself, and sometimes she managed to drip from a vial into the food, probably cooked in it. I used my own hands to take it to Sophia, the poison. Anyway, Lucy was caught red-handed. She was now under investigation. Nancy had been taken by her father, a man who had wanted to communicate with the child for a long time, but was prevented from doing so because he was too poor to do so, too unworthy. Sophia, and everything will be fine, Adriana assured her. The child was not to blame for what his mother wanted to create. And Sophia, how is she? Sophia is fine. There was a ringing voice from behind her. Julia turned around and met Sophia's eyes. She was still very thin and pale, but she had the strength to walk around the house. A real miracle. The doctors said she would recover quickly. Julia. James walked slowly along the shelves of the children's store. It was a section for girls, so it seemed to both of them as if they were in the realm of pink and purple. Dolls, baby cosmetics, soft toys. It was mind-boggling. When I was in Europe, a guy bought his nephew a voice-activated robot. This is the thing. Maybe Sophia would like something like that. She's a girl, reminds me of Julia, and she definitely wants a cartoon character doll. We should try to find one. Maybe next birthday she won't want toys at all. Kids grow up so fast. It's amazing. We'll soon see for ourselves. James put his hand on Julia's rounded belly. The baby responded immediately with a still weak but tangible kick. A year ago, right after Sophia had been rescued from her evil stepmother, Julia had been in for another surprise. She continued to live close to Sophia. Sophia was recovering quickly, mastering active games, asking to take her for walks all over the city. The girl was still very attached to Julia, and that one still needed a job, and Julia had gotten used to everyone. To the girl Adriana, even William did not want to part with them. The adults initially decided not to tell Sophia the truth about what had happened to her. It was too scary a story, but the sensible girl managed to put two and two together, listened to something, thought of something. The story itself did not have a strong, destructive effect on her, as adults feared. Sophia took everything quite calmly. Everything is just like in fairy tales. The girl shrugged her shoulders. The little girl was coming back to life. In September, she went to school with her peers. And Julia was finally able to recover at the university, chose a correspondence department, because she had to not only study, but also work. However, her work was more like living in a family with her relatives. Sweet, cheerful Sophia, kind, wise Vera Petrovna, always busy, but polite and attentive William. With these people, Julia was cozy, warm, and comfortable. They took her in still and were very grateful to her for her rescue. Sophia, it is scary to think what could have happened if not for that terrible dream. They discussed this unusual event. First, Betty had dreamed about Julia, then about William. Adriana was sure Betty had broken through time and worlds to save her daughter. William only shook his head and did not give his opinion. And Julia, she didn't know what to think. Perhaps Lucy had aroused her suspicions at once. After all, she had not liked Sophia's stepmother at first sight. More likely, Julia was running through the thoughts in her head. It is possible that they were transformed into unusual dreams, except that William also dreamed Betty and asked him to believe. Julia found it more difficult to explain. That day, Julia left the house alone. Sophia was doing her homework. Adriana was doing chores around the house. Julia had to drive to the university to bring some documents to the dean's office. Suddenly, James stepped toward her. Julia couldn't believe her eyes from the Chantenou hair. And him? He looked happy and confused, smiling, looking at Julia as if there was no one more important to him in this world. "At last I found you," he said, and without delay he pressed her against him. Julia did not understand anything, but she did not resist. She pressed against her lover, enjoyed his closeness, and tried not to think about James's betrayal, about his sudden disappearance. The explanation turned out to be ridiculously simple. James simply dropped his phone into the ocean during a walk on a steamer. Naturally, the gadget disappeared irretrievably. Julia was not registered in social networks, so he simply could not contact her. No way. James wrote letters, like in the good old days of letters and telegrams. But Julia had moved in with William and was hardly ever home. So the letters piled up in the mailbox and then for some reason disappeared. Julia remembered this moment. One day she came home and saw that the mailbox door was broken. Someone had opened the box and taken the letters for some reason. Maybe the kids. Maybe a nosy neighbor. In short, Julia hadn't heard from James, so she assumed he'd forgotten about her. Started a new life, betrayed her. I couldn't just drop everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. Without you, without news of you, it was unbearable. But I knew I would have to wait, and then financially I would be able to provide for us for many years to come. And then I could fly to you and explain everything. I had no idea. You're in some kind of dire straits. I didn't know you had to take out a loan. I didn't know you'd been laid off. It's been so hard on you. That's it. Just an unfortunate set of circumstances. Julia was glad that her feelings and James' feelings were real. That there was no betrayal or deception in her life. Just a misunderstanding that had finally been resolved. James now had a contract with a well-known producer in the capital. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, gigs, tours, opportunities to take his music to people who were ready to accept it. And money? Money, of course. James was even able to buy an apartment for the two of them. It was in the middle of a renovation. James and Julia got married. They were already expecting a child. Julia felt happy and loved. She no longer worked for William. And a grown-up Sophia didn't need a 24-hour nanny to take care of her. But they all remained friends. And right now, Julia and James were picking out a 9th birthday present for Sophia that might not have been.